This enigmatic story narrates the moment when the protagonist's life tragically ended on the battlefield. In her last seconds, Jonah finds comfort in her husband, just as her moment of glory arrived. And feats. Her bright eyes were reddish amber, but despite their beauty, life was fading in them every instant. The Lord leaned over the young woman's inert body and begged her not to close her eyes, or she could never wake up. The beautiful girl with white hair was slowly withering away, leaving behind the bitterness of betrayal. But she recognized Duke Leary. Leary Han's presence was a mystery, but for him, it was crucial that the lady recovered as soon as possible. Jonah Madhav was the emperor's sword and served ruler Richard loyally since he was far from the throne. She was by his side from the beginning and held the title of personal knight, fulfilling every one of his orders. Lately, during her service, unpleasant rumors about their relationship began to circulate. Therefore, His Majesty decided to marry Jonah, believing that the identity of the groom would be indifferent to her. For some, marriage is the most important thing. But Richard chose Duke Leary Han as her husband. To restore her family's stained prestige, she opted for a strategy to increase her own influence. From the moment they stood before the altar until now, Jonah never considered them spouses. It always seemed to her that the Duke thought the same. But then, his presence there was truly very strange. The exhausted warrior maiden did not understand why Lear had come for her. If he always treated her with distrust, Yona told herself that the Duke did not come to save her. And she dared to ask why he was there then. As Lear said, there was nothing strange about a loving husband deciding to rescue his wife. Although in her case it was truly very strange, something the Duke was forced to agree with. The wound received in battle was much deeper than Yona thought. Despite the pain, she wanted to know the real reason for his arrival. But the Duke would only tell when they were safe. It was an impossible condition. Jonah was doomed to death if Leary was not lucky. The same fate awaited him. But the Duke was sure. If the lady had enough strength left for jibes, it meant she could live. Lear Han behaved strangely, as if he really wanted to save his political wife. Jonah, abandoned on the battlefield by the emperor, suddenly asked about His Majesty. That she was interested in the cruel lord greatly angered the Duke. However tyrannical he was, falling for one's lord was an honor for any knight. Leary certainly did not believe it, and his disappointment was visible in his eyes, full of despair. At that moment, a strong rejection was felt. The Duke finally understood that his suspicions were true. The Lord declared that he had long suspected their strange relationship with the Lord. At that instant, Jonah flinched in pain. She needed to hold on a little longer until help arrived. She still couldn't believe he made that whole trip alone. Worried about her, Miss Madhav was so cold to him because she knew of her imminent death. If these were truly Miss Madhav's last minutes, she decided to ask her husband for a favor. Upon hearing that, the Duke turned around and begged her not to say any more nonsense. Longing for true happiness, Jonah's last wish was a final kiss. Lyric couldn't contain his emotions upon hearing that, unaware of his wife's feelings. In reality, the sweet protagonist thought it was unfair to die without kissing her husband one last time. It was impossible to resist those eyes, which shone like an entire universe. The Duke looked at the floor and begged her not to pretend that he could inspire tender feelings of love. In all their life together, they exchanged a few words, but in that moment of despair, something sparked between them. Leary slowly approached his wife, feeling her soft breath. A mysterious bond attracted them. The scent of Jonah's lips had never intoxicated him like this. She's so close. It was her last kiss. Exhaling her last breath, the heroine tried to remember what she might regret in the end. If circumstances had been different, she and the Duke could have lived a happy marriage. Nothing came to the beautiful Yona's mind. She gave her last sigh, and her crimson eyes closed forever. Her heart could not bear the pain and stopped, although a blush still showed through her porcelain skin. Miss Madhav fought against the darkness enveloping her body, but suddenly she saw the real world again. From the silence came a loud bang on the table. She saw a huge fist in front of her. Fate gave Jonah a second chance. She returned to life, as if it were a moment of longed-for happiness. The young woman was in a cozy room, where an enraged lord sat in front of her demanding something. Hayden Modrov was not going to let that brat distract him right now. That's why he was yelling. Jonah was in shock to meet her father. If she was supposed to have died a long time ago, she understood that she had fallen into a real hell. Although she imagined the underworld to be something different. Her father was such a bad person that this fate was the most likely for him. Without a doubt. Gathering courage, the girl let slip that he looked quite well there and even younger. What audacity! Upon hearing that, Lord Hayden boiled with rage and began to shout with all his might. He was beside himself, blinded by fury. He raised his hand in the air and prepared to strike his ungrateful daughter. How horrible! But Jonah was no longer a child. Without fear in her eyes, she easily stopped her father's furious hand. Blood ties were not an obstacle for the warrior. She quickly twisted the Count's arm and bent him over the table. Jonah could not be called a harpy after her father betrayed all his vows and got involved with some woman. The furious Hayden Modrov dared not only to insult her, but also to dream of eliminating her. He considered her a miserable brat, but Jonah did not mock for long and threw him away with all her might. As if he had lost his mind, the Count lunged at her, threatening not to mention his father again. The young woman stared fixedly at her father's blows and understood that he had long ceased to be her real father. Thanks to her constant training, she skillfully dodged the blow and grabbed him by the hair to stop him. With a simple trip, she brought down that crazed bull, making him crash onto the floor. Hearing him claim he had raised her all those years, Jonah asked him to tell that to his other offspring. The Count surely knew that she had become the head of the family after him. And she was ruthless. Everything around them turned into chaos, and the poor son and daughter of the Count failed to understand that they had died. Hayden was terrified and in a terrible situation, but he couldn't just watch his daughter use her high position. He suddenly shouted that she only became the crown prince's guard through his influence. Yona approached, but her face froze in amazement. All this time she believed she was protecting the emperor. The girl was illegitimate, and Modrov took her in only because of her talent with the sword. The Count wanted to secure the support of the future ruler, leaving no trace behind. That's why he chose her, a bastard daughter, as a gift for the crown prince. Hayden raised her in captivity, hidden from view, tempering her character with harsh training. If Yona failed, he left her hungry and beat her. That cruelty was unbearable for a child, but he managed to turn her into the perfect pawn for the emperor. It hurt her to discover it was the prince, not the emperor, and she noticed her father's rejuvenated appearance. And the old lamp, which she herself had replaced, was still in its place. Panic immediately flooded Yana. She didn't understand what year it was or how old she was. Then, Hayden became convinced that his daughter was so blinded by the ambitions of marrying the Duke that she lost her memory. The protagonist hasn't gone crazy. She simply doesn't know she has the power to change destiny. Looking in the mirror, she noticed that the scar mark on her face was gone. Looking at her hands, Jonah couldn't believe that the wound from the last battle had disappeared. Young Modrov understood that she had returned to the past and had a chance to rewrite history. At that moment, Nils Modrov and Ivan Modrov burst into the room, completely bewildered. Seeing their father in a terrible state, Nils was very scared and asked who had attacked him. His presence did not please Jonah, as those bastards were still alive and kicking. But something in her head made the girl change her expression, as if she had devised something brilliant. To everyone's surprise, one of the Count's daughters let out a laugh, as if she had lost her mind. While Ivan attended to her father, Nils accused the infamous one of attacking her own progenitor. Jonas just raised her hands and asked if he didn't want to know why Hayden was picking his nose off the floor. And why he was lying in the corner, like a boneless puppet. After hearing such insults, Nils exploded in fury, demanding that the young lady watch her words. But Miss Modrov believed that he should mind his manners and respect the emperor's personal night. Furious Nils couldn't take it anymore, and driven by anger, he slapped his sister. Feeling the pain inflicted by her brother, Jonah understood that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yvonne did not intervene. After all, Jonah once failed to answer her question about the crown prince's schedule. Plotting something terrible, Nils told his sister not to worry. He would teach the half-breed a lesson and break her leg. A year ago, during a hunt, Nils shot her with a rifle, but the brave young woman knew that the fearsome Madrov would not have another chance. The young master wasted no time and decided to punish his adopted sister for her words. At that instant, the ruthless Yona gritted her teeth and landed a punch on his face. It was the moment when justice triumphed and put everyone in their place. Humiliated and offended, Nils fell to the floor, kneeling before her. He lost several teeth and could barely speak, but he was not going to tolerate it. He opened his mouth, and before everyone's eyes, his teeth began to fall out. That was the last straw. The young man became enraged and clenched his fist. In his anger, Nils reached for the family weapon by the fireplace to punish that brat. Face to face with her brother, not a hint of fear was reflected in Jonah's eyes. Since the young man was going to take a life, the girl demanded that he be ready to risk his own. The time for Nils, Madrov, to take responsibility for his actions has come. No one wanted to admit it, but Jana Madrov was an exceptionally talented swordswoman. The Count's son knew that if he confronted her now, she would sever any of his limbs. Moreover, she could decapitate him without the slightest effort. That's how dangerous the situation was. This barbarity had to be stopped. So the Count ordered his son to stop. Lord Hayden didn't want to hear a single retort and insisted he back down. The old Count had the clarity to order his daughter to step back as well. Jonah had stepped back too many times to obey her father. And she would soon meet the Duke. The question was only when they would meet for the first time. To start with, the heroine got rid of all the maids who were spying on her. She ordered them to tell the Count that the sent women had given themselves away, and nobody expected them back. The girl knew that after their first encounter, her father would be an angel. It was like a dream, a divine gift, or a punishment when Jonah returned to the past. She never wished to reincarnate, but seeing the Duke once more would be great. Jonah had to seize her chance to rewrite her destiny and create a world where she and her husband could live happily. 2 days later, everything began at the Imperial Knights' headquarters. On the way, Miss Madrov couldn't stop thinking about how to act when meeting the Lord. She reflected that he had gone to help her because he didn't want to be a widower so soon. The girl was unaware of her fate after her death, if she had survived. Her meeting with the Duke was imminent, so Jonah's would wisely wait. Suddenly, her fingers touched her lips. A warmth flooded her. Memories enveloped her. She could still feel the warmth of his last kiss, burned into her memory. She intended to reward the one who would throw himself into battle for her, Jonah thought. The girl longed to reunite with Hayden and confirm that he was still alive. Saskia, the commander of the Knights, received her inside and invited her in. She instantly understood that Jonah had caused a scene and had to stay in the office. Saskia fiercely refused the help, arguing that the crown prince had called for her. After those words, the young woman froze. She couldn't believe that His Highness was waiting for her. Looking at her, Saskia knew that Jonah was wearing makeup only to hide new injuries and bruises. She was always a mess, and anyone would notice instantly just by looking at her. The commander was sure it was Nils' work, that monster. She suddenly said that Nils had gone too far, and the young woman should not tolerate his humiliations. Saskia spoke very seriously and threatened the girl not to show up again with a new bruise. In high society, there was nothing more shameful than an illegitimate child. That's why the Count forged Jonah's documents. That's why some believed Madrov had adopted the girl, and nobody questioned her relationship with Jonah. Otherwise, Saskia promised to challenge Nils to a duel, but the girl doubted he would accept her challenge. In any case, the most important thing now was to meet His Majesty. Finally, the commander said that nobody had behaved as brazenly towards her as Yona. But for her, nothing surpassed having a trusting relationship with her commander. When Miss Madrov arrived at the Crown Prince's chambers, the maid reported that he was already asleep. The protagonist could leave, but she chose to stay and admire his incomparable beauty. Being an imperial knight, the young woman knelt down and bowed her head in respect. She suggested postponing her visit if he felt fatigued, showing consideration. Jonah did not look up, maintaining her respect, but she noticed the prince's presence nearby. Her lord got up from the warm bed and sat on the edge, his bare torso shining in the sun. Richard Lehman commented that his knight was very impatient and forced him to interrupt his sleep. Besides, he heard that Jonah had broken Nil's teeth, but she attributed it to simple rumors. Richard hated lies above all else, so he demanded that his knight tell the truth. It was impossible to resist those words. The lord was not who Jonah desired, but she obeyed his orders without complaint. The young woman was just a pawn in his game, and she acted with submission to survive this nightmare. She never sought his approval nor expected praise, but she did long to ask him something crucial. In the past, the Duke rushed onto the battlefield to save his wife. A forced marriage. Richard was not near to help her. Or did he simply not want to do it at that moment? Miss Modrov confessed to having punched Nils in the jaw after a fight he started. The Reverend supposed the conflict was related to her impending marriage. What a scandal! Suddenly, he gently brushed her white skin, and instantly the young woman's eyes melted. Lord Lehman was willing to cancel that marriage if she objected. What a great gesture! Richard's beauty was incomparable. One could get lost in the deep blue of his eyes. Shocked, Jonah looked into his eyes, trying to see his soul. He approached abruptly, and now their breaths mingled. Their hearts beat in unison. Richard's scent captivated her. He spoke so sweetly, as if he were sincere with her. In the past, he asked the knight the same question. This way, he wanted to test her loyalty. The crown prince knew that the girl was always willing to follow his orders. The young woman was always like this, free-spirited and sincerely loyal. The sweet heroine instantly changed her expression and expressed her delight in her future husband. Definitely, that wasn't what the crown prince wanted to hear. He said he was pleased with a marriage without coercion and dismissed the girl. Her fiancé was due to arrive today. At first, the prince wanted to introduce them, but upon seeing Yona's face, he changed his mind because of her huge bruise. The girl was happy about the Duke's arrival in the capital, but she forgot about the scar. Above all, the palace was full of eyes and ears, which made it difficult to talk to the Duke. In that case, the imperial knight requested permission to withdraw. By then, the Duke was already in the outer courtyard of the imperial garden. The incomparable Leroy Han did not want to be closely watched, so he decided to go on his own. But as his assistant thought, a guide definitely wouldn't hurt. This sudden political marriage placed the Duke in a very uncomfortable position. And unstable. No one imagined that the head of the Han clan, who had barely recovered, would be received like this in the palace. Throughout history, the Han family has been very close to their neighbors, the Schmid Counts family. These families decided to marry their children to unite two friendly clans. But 7 years ago, the Schmid Counts family was declared traitors to the homeland. Following the revelation of secret documents, the entire family was executed without prior notice. As the reigning dynasty suspected treason from the Han family too, they confiscated their assets and imprisoned their relatives. And then, Duke and Duchess Han died in a tragic accident. No one believed it was a coincidence, but this chain of events led the Duke's family to ruin. Leroy lost his parents, his good name, and also his future fiancée. He fought to restore the good name of a family that no one wanted dealings with. But suddenly, he was hit with bad news. The crown prince decided to marry a loyal bitch. The goal of this marriage was clear to Han. The crown prince also wanted to tie him down with a short leash. Jonas asserted that the crown prince would regret treating the Duke this way. But Leroy suddenly interrupted him. He had heard footsteps approaching. The situation was tense. That someone could overhear Jonas's babbling. White strands of hair fluttered in the wind, exhaling a soft scent like a light feather. The light and charming guest was Jonah. Her appearance today was particularly unparalleled. Leroy froze in astonishment. He was literally struck by the young woman's beauty. Jonah did not hide her joy. Her eyes shone under the sunbeams, upon seeing her chosen one. It seemed as if the moment stood still under the light breeze. Their first meeting in this new life was a miracle. Jonah Madrov introduced herself as a member of the Imperial Guard and bowed her head. Lyra Han noticed a slight smile on her face and said he didn't expect to see her so soon. The naive beauty did not lose hope and dared to believe they already knew each other, but the Duke disappointed her by confessing he rarely visited the capital. Jonah's gaze darkened instantly, apologizing for bothering him at that moment. In reality, she only longed for permission to accompany Lyra to the Crown Prince's palace. However, the Duke knew the way well and did not want to distract her from her duties. Trying to persuade the Lord, the young woman assured him that she had no urgent matters now. Despite the girl's vain efforts, Jonas led the Lord towards the palace. This left a bitter taste, but Jonas showed nothing and wished the Duke a good trip. After the Duke helped her, the protagonist looked at him with different eyes. When Miss Madrov saw that he was fine, she felt great relief in her heart. But upon seeing her, Leroy always becomes alert, perhaps because she serves His Highness. The Crown Prince trusted her, but now Jonah was convinced that he did not like her. When the rebels broke into the palace and the revolt broke out, it was vital to contain the crowd. Jonah watched everything with a heavy heart, when suddenly she received a message from the Emperor. His Majesty ordered Lady Jonah Madrov and the soldiers of the 1st Division to remain there. The young woman heard that the Emperor was going to retreat and couldn't utter a single word. Shortly after meeting the Duke, Jonah returned to the family home, where her father was already waiting for her. Haydn Madrov was furious because his daughter was out somewhere again. Jonah simply walked past him, brushing his shoulder, and didn't even deign to explain anything. Seeing her appearance, the worried father ran after her and warned her that rumors would spread. But the girl knew that the rumor of Nell's hitting her had already spread. The Count began to rant, as his daughter managed without maids since she dismissed them. According to Lord Madrov, she dressed indecently and disgraced his illustrious name. He even dared to remind her of her brother's terrible act, for which she stained the family honor. At that moment, Jonah couldn't stand it anymore and declared that one could not hit just anyone to avoid rumors. Erasing all traces of blows from her face and body could restore the family honor. Her fight with her father threw the young woman into a rage, and she accused him of being the shame of the family. In 2 days, she had an appointment with her fiancé, and the bride's face showed a monstrosity. The father understood that the Duke could use this pretext and break off the marriage if his daughter showed up with a bruise. In that case, the Emperor's plans would be frustrated, and the Count could not allow it. By saying that Nils was rough and impatient, Haydn was only trying to get closer to his daughter. Family members should always support and cover for each other, but it was difficult for Jonah. Her father said that he had even chased away the maids, which is why he worried about her. According to the Count, he only worried, but the sweat on his forehead completely betrayed him. The girl heard apologies for the first time, smiled radiantly, and said that Daddy shouldn't apologize. Nils hit his sister, so Jonah wanted to hear an apology from him personally. In short, Haydn hoped his daughter would forgive Nils and rehire the maids. In a short time, while Jonah drank tea, Nils' shouts of discontent sounded like a symphony. The stubborn young man didn't want to apologize for anything in the world and demanded that the girl cancel the engagement. But Haydn Madrov did everything possible to calm him down and even threatened to cut him out of the will. Whoever committed the act, one way or another, had to admit their guilt. Under his father's pressure, Nils had no choice but to apologize. Jonah wasn't foolish and demanded that the young man specify why he was apologizing. When Nils repented, his father was finally pleased and cheered up. In turn, Miss Madrov said she didn't want to do it, but she apologized anyway. According to her, if Nils was hurt, he should have been quicker to dodge. At such unheard-of apologies, the young man's face even twitched, according to him. The last time, he told her exactly the same thing. Besides, she started at first. There was nothing more humiliating for Nils than having his own language used against him. The enraged young man shook his fist in the air, wanting to strike the impudent liar. But a second later, his hand froze in the air due to his father's thunderous shout. This act infuriated the count. He had already told his son to shut up and not squeal. Nils tried to calm his father. He had enough behaving so vilely in front of the younger ones. Seeing this circus, Jonah didn't want to end up crying, so she decided to put an end to the scene. She said that Nils had already learned his lesson and promised she would forget what happened. Moreover, the young woman wanted to personally choose the maid who would work for her. Young Madhav was so absorbed in other matters that she hadn't even thought about a maid. Hayden was right. It was not proper for a high society lady to be without personal servants. This meant that Jonah had to find someone she could trust. When she was little, she forbade maids from visiting her. Nobody cared about the state her room was in. A maid dared to ask if the young lady wished to leave that place. Upon hearing a negative answer, she left as if nothing had happened. But suddenly, she filled the room with light and wanted to turn it into a home. The red head was engraved in her memory. She said that not everything was fixed by cleaning. The butler interrupted the torrent of memories, awaiting orders. Jonah revealed that, after the countess's death, they sent a maid to a distant estate. Meticulous preparation awaited her the next morning, an important event. At that moment, a fragile young woman in a pompous dress entered. The young lady had called her. The redhead from her childhood, whom Jonah would never forget, was named Marcia. Miss Madhav was very kind and told her that the position of personal maiden was vacant. Marcia was a perfect fit for this candidacy, which took her completely by surprise. The young woman saw no other servants in the palace and feared being the only one. The fact is that the imperial knight did not need unnecessary enemies. Rumors of the engagement with the duke reached Marcia. That's why she didn't understand where the servants were. According to Yona, she would hire them after the engagement in a couple of months. But Marcia wasn't referring to that. She said that the young lady hadn't changed much. The maiden was confused and asked if the count knew about her return. The butler must have informed him already, but the count would not allow Marcia to work. However, Madhav had already made a decision, and no one would tell him what to do. Marcia made a grave mistake. The lady had grown a lot in her absence. Marcia didn't get promoted, not due to lack of skill. She was simply careless and cooked terribly. But she was the only one who took care of Jonah, cleaning and bandaging her wounds. That's why she soon fell out of favor with Hayden, who sent her far from his sight. Marcia became enraged every time she heard that Jonah was not receiving recognition from the emperor. Jonah could only be saddened, unable to blame him. And then Marcia told her that the young lady should think about herself above all else. She was so right, but the heroine didn't follow her advice, as she never had the strength to run away from a family that didn't love her. The girl understood her mistake in the last moments of her life, when she was saved by a man who had every right to hate her. With new strength, Yona decided not to repeat the mistake that led her to the grave. Gathering courage, the young woman thanked Marcia for always being by her side and comforting her. Miss Madhav never valued herself, but the maid's words gave her a breath of fresh air. So the lady returned the favor and promised to stop being so pusillanimous. Those words touched Marcia's heart. She cherished Yona as much as she cherished her. Hayden did not oppose Marcia's return. He became quieter than water and lower than grass. In the daily hustle, without realizing it, the day of her meeting with the Duke arrived. While Marcia combed her mistress's white curls, Jonah reflected before her wedding. The young woman thought it was curious that the Count believed her marriage would strengthen their ties with the imperial family. Rumors spread widely, even though it was only an engagement. The noble lady was ready for the ceremony. Her white hair tied up and earrings enhancing her beauty. A low-cut white dress flattered her curves, while white gloves added mystery to her figure. As she went down to receive the guests, Yona heard herself being compared to a painted striped tiger. A harpy in a green dress said the girl's bland outfit would impress the Duke. Moreover, the unpleasant woman noticed an exaggerated layer of makeup on Yona's face. The brave lady, without hesitation, ordered Marque to bring her combat sword. Yvonne was very annoyed by this. She became furious and said that a knight could not touch a lady. But the cynical woman forgot to mention the small detail that Yona was also a lady. The heroine approached Yvonne, and even her maids trembled with sheer terror. Pathetic Yvonne shrank in humiliation. Jonah called her a vulgar spawn. The girl couldn't stand those words and shouted at her sister. The Duke heard their fight. Leary-Han watched their catfight. He decided not to intervene and watch the show. The Duke arrived at the palace minutes ago. What a surprise for the Madrov family. Leary politely apologized for arriving 10 minutes earlier than expected. He didn't want to admit it, but that first meeting was seared into his memory. The Lord longed for a reunion with the young woman with amber eyes and pale hair. By then, Yvonne was beside herself, accusing the dirty blood of ruining the family. The angry lady demanded Yona's forgiveness, who caused no one to see her mother's last breath. Yona remained silent. They reminded her of that every time they tried to humiliate her. Countess Madrov died 5 years ago. It was a fateful day. In the last moments of her life, she did not want her husband or her children near. She longed to see Yona, that bastard born outside of marriage. It hurt the young woman that no one heard the countess's last words. The milady did not utter a single word. She departed, leaving behind only a shadow. The Duchess watched everything without blinking, while the Count sweated nervously. Hayden supposed that his youngest daughter envied Yona's impending engagement. Then the Duke understood he hadn't misheard. He did not expect a fiancé from such a refined family. To change the subject, the Count suggested moving from the reception hall to the drawing room. At that moment, beauty flooded the drawing room. Young Yona revealed herself to the Duke in her true form. The young woman prepared extensively for this event, and today she shone brighter than the jewel on her neck. The long wait for Miss Madrov was worth it. Lear could not look away. The knight, apologizing for arriving early, approached to kiss the lady's hand. This meeting was highly anticipated. Yona confessed that they were counting the days for this encounter. From her naive and sincere gaze, one could see she was telling the truth. They hadn't met before, and the Duke didn't understand why the lady received him so affectionately. Yona Madrov was truly an enigmatic woman. To discuss confidential matters, they headed to the lake near the old city. Despite the makeup, the mark of a bruise could still be distinguished on Yona. The Duke knew that the rejection of an illegitimate son was common in noble circles. That made him realize that she had suffered abuse from an early age. To be honest, Richard Lehman valued that girl greatly, confessing it to the Duke. According to him, Lady Jonah was loyal like a lapdog. But it seemed cruel to the hero to hand over such a valuable girl to another man. Emperors used to do that with their lovers, although the title of Duchess was too much for her. The Crown Prince said he didn't intend to reveal their relationship, so the family honor was safe. Because Richard knew that, for the hero who so desired to restore his clan's ancient glory. This was ideal. However, the Crown Prince warned the Duke not to even think about taking her innocence. If Lord Lehman planned to marry her, it would be to someone who wouldn't touch her even with a rose petal. Lighting his pipe, he hoped to keep what belonged to him. Lear-Han saw lust in his eyes. Now the Duke was a chain to prevent the lady from going far. When the master remembered that talk with the prince, he finally understood what Yona was trying to tell him. The girl wanted to draw a dividing line in their future relationship, and immediately. In the garden by the lake, there were only the two of them. Now the lady could speak calmly. Resolved, Jonah begged him to listen to her silently, staring fixedly into his eyes. After thinking for a while, the young woman offered the Duke her hand and heart, proposing marriage. She could make him happy. The master couldn't believe his ears. He heard the truth in her words, but it was unthinkable. Then Miss Madrov bent over the clearing, adorned with flowers, and cut the most beautiful white rose. As a sign of her sincere intentions, she swore to make the Duke happy. It was hard to imagine what was going on in Jonah's head, but she spoke with her heart on her sleeve. Lear was sure that the girl did not remember their first meeting. This meant she had taken a liking to the Duke after seeing him twice. Then Jonah became embarrassed and explained that she hadn't confessed her feelings to him. The young woman understood that such a proposal could be taken as humiliating. Although it wasn't easy, the young woman was willing to do everything possible. Many believed that her impending marriage was a union between the duke's family and the emperor, but Jonah said that, in reality, Lyra was simply bowing to her will. Just because Jonah was the crown prince's confidant, they forced the duke to marry a woman of low standing. However, as his wife, she was willing to be useful so that the marriage would be considered extremely beneficial. According to the protagonist, this would only be true for the parties involved. That is why Yona was going to become the head of the Madra family. And then, upon divorce, Lyra would obtain the clan's title. Moreover, the duke could obtain properties and part of the assets. The girl wasn't looking for a bombastic title. She just wanted to secure a decent life for Lyra. The duke wouldn't believe this heresy, and in a deep voice, he demanded the lady invent something else. To convince the duke, Jonah stated that it had been her own decision. But Lyra saw that the girl was going against the crown prince's will and speaking of loyalty. The duke didn't understand. Jonah contradicted herself, although her words sounded sincere. The protagonist was more devoted to Prince Richard than she should have been. That's why she wasn't getting her hopes up and knew that Lyra could change his opinion of her. Then, the duke was completely confused and thought the girl wasn't acting under the prince's orders. If Richard wanted to send a spy, he would choose a girl with a cleaner past. This made the duke think that Jonah had simply been disappointed by the crown prince after his decision on marriage. For a girl like her, showing the crown prince her successful life was a form of revenge. The milady served the crown prince for a long time, so the duke's distrust was justified. After all, it was Jonah's responsibility to prove she was serious. But loyalty was not a feeling that could be one-sided. The protagonist was willing to wait as long as necessary for Lyra to believe her words. A soft spring breeze swept the milady's hat to the center of the lake. By then, Jonah's had already returned and had become interested in their conversation. And then Lyra asked, what should a man reply to a woman who asks him to marry her? Completely bewildered, Jonas said that Lady Jonah was out of her mind. According to him, the girl couldn't have softened up so much after their second meeting. But in reality, the duke had met her before, a long time ago. He recounted that the encounter was fleeting. That's why Jonah didn't remember it at all. While they were chatting, Marcia took the opportunity to fix the lady's messy hair. The atmosphere for the young people was not the best. So Lyra suggested staying on the estate. But Jonah, suddenly, decided to end the meeting and gave the duke time to think. The lord believed they needed to get to know each other better and have a deep conversation. Lyra had declared that he was not going to allow the lady to return home alone. This was a shock to Jonah, and she asked him to choose a place to wait comfortably. The girl just wanted to take a look at a place that didn't suit the duke's status. The truth was paramount to Lyra, so he demanded to know everything. The protagonist had no choice but to confess that she was going to Pasha Street. Pasha was a notoriously infamous neighborhood of vice and gambling. It was a regrettable place, but Jonah wasn't going to meet men there. The truth was that she needed to find a woman in Pasha. Count Hayden Modrov was selfish, but the worst was his view of marriage. Before marrying, he had many mistresses, and even afterward, he continued to be unfaithful. It was no surprise that the count had an illegitimate son. After the countess's death, Hayden completely let loose. And now, even the strayest dog knew about his lover Fleur, whom the protagonist was going to visit. Pasha was a neighborhood of forbidden pleasures. Among the crowd of libertines, John noted those red eyes that destroyed the count's personality. The young woman proposed that the hero wait for her elsewhere if he felt uncomfortable. But the duke had already prepared mentally and was not going to back down. However, he still didn't understand why Jonah needed this. The milady knew that this kind of meeting was unacceptable for the duke, but the alibi was perfect. Lyra and Jonah ran after the prostitute. They should arrive at the location soon. Omitting details, the young woman said she was doing all this for her partner. As soon as the heroes arrived at the house, Jonah knocked on the door, but she heard a voice. Furious, Fleur came out immediately and, full of rage, started shouting that she had worked all night. But at the door, the Count's mistress saw Miss Madrov and froze. Inside Fleur's house, there was terrible disorder, with things scattered everywhere. The vulgar lady supposed that Jonah had come to ask her to end her relationship with her father. But the problem was that Fleur had not the slightest intention of doing so. Young Madrov suddenly said that this conversation had to be kept secret. It will soon be the anniversary of the Countess's death. However, Fleur didn't care and was simply going to light a cigarette. According to the protagonist, her father's mistress should not appear at such a family event and cause scandals. These words greatly angered Fleur, and she started shouting loudly. But her face changed immediately when the Count's daughter dropped a generous compensation onto the table. Miss Madrov was willing to double the sum if the relationship between them ended right there. The lady seemed not to have seen so much gold in her life, opening her mouth in astonishment. With the gold in her possession, she only had to cause a scandal on the Countess's death anniversary. However, she said that catching a rich man was not an easy task, and the gold was not enough. Father never stayed long with one woman. And Jonah knew that very well. Hayden was with Fleur for about a year, and she couldn't get anything more out of him. Count Madrov was not very generous with his women, or Fleur would not be living in that shack. Milady said that father would soon find a new toy. Many wanted Fleur's spot. Moreover, Jonah knew that her father had many other women around him. So Fleur understood that the old man hardly came because he had found another one. The thought that the Count would soon abandon her gnawed at the poor woman inside. Suddenly, she reached out her hand towards the money bag, reiterating the terms of the deal. The bright gold coins attracted her, but she didn't understand what the others gained from this. Jonah explained that severing ties on the opposing side would benefit the entire family. When Fleur causes a scandal at the Countess's anniversary, Niels and Yvonne will throw her out. But their anger won't be directed at Fleur, but at their own father. They will immediately remember how Hayden entertained himself with lovers while their mother agonized. Miss Madrov wanted to use this opportunity to ruin Nils' relationship with his father. But the Duke considered this plan risky, something that couldn't be taken seriously. Yona was prepared for his rejection. After all, she was a piece of the enemy. 1,000 questions assailed the hero. He didn't understand the necessity of such a complicated plan. Jonah understood too late that the one to whom she swore loyalty didn't deserve it. Now the Duke understood that the young woman was acting this way because of the prince's betrayal. Richard always openly declared that their relationship would always be a secret. Layman understood that the lady was willing to ruin her life just to annoy the traitor. In that case, he asked her to think again and choose her partner more carefully. Even if Miss Madrov had all the time in the world, she would always choose the Duke. She didn't care how much he trusted her. She was ready to be a dirty spy. Yona was sure that Leroy wasn't one of those men capable of betraying his wife. After those words, the Duke was speechless. The puzzle pieces fit in his head. Now the Lord only wanted to know what sum of money he should hand over to achieve it. Miss Madrov said that 100,000 gold coins were enough. Her family would give the same sum as dowry. That is, the heroine risked her value. Meanwhile, tension reigned in the Madrov family palace. A maid fell to the floor terrified. The slap burned her face. Yvonne, in tears, shouted with all her might. She was not ready for Yona to become a duchess. Now the young woman thought that even the maids looked at her with contempt. Since she wasn't the one who would become duchess, she was sure they were mocking her. After receiving several slaps, the defenseless maid tried to convince her mistress otherwise. Furious, Yvonne grabbed a cup and smashed it on the floor. The pieces flew everywhere. She considered Yona a harpy who dared not utter a peep before the engagement. Incredible. Hayden disliked the scene. And right in front of the Duke, the Count berated his daughter for her behavior. She had disgraced the family, but Yvonne wouldn't calm down. She insisted they shouldn't have brought that ragamuffin. The Count couldn't stand this madness anymore. He immediately dismissed Yvonne from his sight. At that moment, a heartbreaking scream echoed. The daughter blamed her father for everything. Lord Madrov exploded, admitting that his children were a complete failure. Yvonne stepped back, incredulous. She felt like she had lived in a cage her whole life. Rage completely consumed her. Yona was the root of all her misfortunes. She was about to leave when, suddenly, her brother called her. Nils confessed that he had gone secretly from his father. The conceited girl burst into tears instantly. She was sad and hurt. As Nils said, the engagement was by order of the imperial family, and the Duke had no interest in Jonah. The young man assured his sister that she shouldn't worry, but they couldn't leave it like that either. He wanted to use Jonah after her engagement to the Duke, but now she was embarrassing her family. Grabbing his sister tightly, Nils declared that she must be the Duchess. Yvonne's bewildered look suggested that she saw it as impossible. But the little brother already had a plan, which consisted of putting the Count's second daughter in place of the missing bride. There could be a lot of fuss, but that was nothing compared to their benefit. Using that brat to restore the family status was a huge mistake from the beginning. The damned Nils decided to take the reins, and the first thing he did was kick out the maids. The girls were trapped, and panic took hold of them. They whispered among themselves, but one maiden decided to take matters into her own hands. The crucial moment in the protagonist's life would arrive soon, and she was overwhelmed. Jonah would soon leave service, something she hadn't even considered before. At that instant, a knock resonated on the door, and the young woman intuited that Marcia was still awake. Upon opening the door, the young lady saw a terrified maiden on the threshold. The late visit from the maid astonished Miss Madrov. The poor girl was trembling and looking everywhere. Despite her doubts, Jonah let her in and decided to find out what was happening. The maiden revealed that the lord and the young lady wanted to harm Jonah, something almost unbelievable. She assured that Nils wanted to get rid of the young lady and hunt Yvonne. Just as she had predicted, the heroine was not surprised. She managed to drive Nils crazy. Most of Lady Yvonne's maids thought the same as that bold girl. But until now, no servant had approached Jonah, not even in distress. Perhaps in her past life, they didn't see her as someone capable of protecting them. However, the girl changed, and now the people around her treated her differently. The main reason for her late visit was that the maid wanted to work for Miss Madrov. According to her, serving Lady Yvonne was simply unbearable. Cornelia promised to serve with loyalty and devotion until the end of her days, if she got the job. Her good heart and thirst for justice did not allow her to reject the honest young woman. It turns out that Cornelia brought with her a couple of objects that Lady Yvonne kept hidden. Jonah took a stack of papers and, upon opening the envelope, saw an invitation. It seemed simply impossible, but the sender was Irene Kruger, the favorite young lady of the Kruger family. Besides her sociable nature, she spent enormous sums of money. Her dances with a pleasant atmosphere and strong drinks attracted many aristocrats. Jonah knew that Yvonne regularly attended the romantic gatherings. Normally, upon receiving an invitation, the heroine rejected them, but those times were long gone. She, as the future Duchess, needed to make her first appearance in society. Soon everything happened in the dining room of the knightly order. One of the soldiers overheard that Lady Jonah had been on a date recently. Today the entire order was gossiping about it. But the young woman told him that he had better train more. Everyone in the squad stared at the milady, as if they didn't care about talking about her. At one point, Jonah couldn't take it anymore and agreed to train a curious soldier in combat. The reason everyone was so eager to stick their noses into other people's business remained a mystery to Jonah. Contrary to what it might seem from the outside, there was not a shred of feeling between them. And the Duke. But the young woman thought that at least they could have managed to be a model couple in appearance. She was so eager to show him that marrying her had many advantages that she overdid it a little. The squad was too insistent, and Jonah couldn't escape the constant teasing. Suddenly, one of the boys said he had heard about Miss Madrov's handsome fiancé. The boy hadn't finished praising the Duke when suddenly Jonah abruptly stood up from the table. She was sick of their gossip, so the protagonist decided to go to work and sort out her thoughts. But upon arriving at Richard's rooms, the girl saw that it was no better. The rumors of the date reached the crown prince, who found an article. The ice knight who stole half the world's heart was seen with the duke. It was no surprise to laymen that the ice lady captivated Duke Lear. However, Jonah said that it seemed he hadn't liked it. Then the crown prince understood everything and felt great pity. He forced the knight into that marriage to mock her. That was very vile. Gathering strength, the protagonist asked why Richard chose Duke Lear. The crown prince was about to have dinner, but that question intrigued him too much. It seemed very strange to him, as his knight did not usually ask such questions. Lord Layman said that Jonah was marrying only because he ordered it. It didn't matter who was chosen, the young woman would not object. It had always been like that. Cutting the juicy meat, the crown prince recounted that it was a marriage of convenience. That she shouldn't worry. The knight would disappoint him if he asked such nonsense again. After those words, Jonah fell silent, lowering her gaze with a bitter taste in her soul. After dinner, the prince was due to leave. Lady Florence was going to make an imminent visit. Richard knew it, so he wanted to pretend he wasn't there, and asked the knight to delay the lady. When the servant left, one of the attendants suddenly blurted out that Miss Modrov should have refused the marriage. But the heroine knew that this would not prevent the Lord's fury, which would fall upon her with all its strength. Asking the reason for an order was not a sin as grave as wandering in the darkness of error. Soon, Lady Florence Lanshoff, daughter of the Marquis and fiancée of His Highness Richard, arrived at the palace. A crucial detail was that she could not stand Jana Modrov in the least. Jana kindly offered to accompany Florence Lanshoff to the waiting room, where she could wait for Richard to wake up. According to Richard's fiancée, the last time she had sat for half a day in that damned room. The lady demanded that the crown prince be notified immediately about her arrival. But the only thing the heroine could do was apologize, as Richard wished to rest. Disobedience to the order infuriated Florence. She visibly tensed and clenched her lips. Rage consumed the young woman, and without even thinking, she raised her hand and slapped the knight on the cheek. In the same spot where Neil had hit himself, but swallowing the pain, Jonah asked the lady to proceed to the hall. Not content with this, one slap followed another. She looked like a madwoman hitting the poor girl. Her face already hurt, but the stubborn damsel insisted on being taken to the reception. Jonah knew that Florence, although the prince's fiancée, was of lower rank and was overstepping. Florence, like everyone else, saw the imperial knight as a mere lapdog. And they were right about that. Her entire young life, Modrov had been like this. After several merciless blows, Florence expected the girl to finally obey. Everything would have been like this if brave Jonah hadn't decided to change everything days ago. After enduring hardships, humiliated and renewed, the heroine would no longer be tied down. Feeling her superiority, Florence was sure that no one would dare contradict her. However, Jonah suddenly asked Marcia for a damp towel and sent Rich to the commander. The heroine declared the start of actions, according to the fourth point of the security protocol. Jonah stated with complete frankness that Lady Florence was obstructing her official duties. Florence, stunned, couldn't believe they were going to kick her out of the imperial palace itself. According to the knight, the fiancé would be notified later about the duration of the ban. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Lanshoff literally boiled with rage and immediately ordered the commander of the knights to be brought. Jonah had the right to follow official protocol if the guest wished it so. However, she wasn't sure that new witnesses would benefit the fiancé's reputation. Soon Florence would become Richard Layman's fiancée, so she wasn't going to let it slide. But Miss Modrov knew that this lady would never marry the crown prince. The Marquis's daughter was not royalty, but she committed many faults using her status as fiancée. Nothing had changed, and in the past, Richard simply abandoned her. The young warrior knew that this time it would be the same as the last. She warned that it was better to have those talks after the wedding, not before seeing her husband. Jonah suggested she leave, but if not, she was ready to kick her to make her move. Those words struck a chord with Florence, who became enraged and wanted to scratch her face. But at that moment, her body was held from all sides, The girl was trapped. The guard arrived just in time. The knights blocked her path with their weapons for security. Florence's helpless screams, as she was forced to leave, sounded like victory fanfares. In her past life, Jonah wouldn't even have dreamed of such behavior, but now she wasn't going to prove anything. At that moment, Marcia thought that His Highness was trying with all his might to break the engagement. The heroine had been hit so many times on the same cheek that it started to hurt badly. It was a good thing Marcia brought a cold towel to soothe the blow. In the end, Miss Modrov didn't want sermons from the commander. So she left. Jonah was healing her wounds with ponies, but someone called her this time. Eric Richter burst into the stable, a promising knight. The day the protagonist died, he was assigned to the 1st Division under her command. Together, they protected the Emperor while he fled in terror. Sir Eric believed that suited Lady Jonah well, but he paid dearly for his loyalty. In his past life, she told him that once he stopped being useful, they simply got rid of him. Even after those words, Jonah fought until she found her pathetic end. But still, she wondered if Sir Eric had survived that day. The promising knight couldn't help but notice that the young lady had been hit again. He said he doubted it was Nils, and supposed Lady Florence was responsible. What a strategy! The cold knight was a terrible example of loyalty, being a punching bag. According to Eric, Jonah's was given a free hand in the Crown Prince's inner circle. And she loved it. The knight was furious that the lady accepted to marry someone she had never seen. By the prince's order, Sir Richter questioned her knightly honor, calling her a lapdog. The heroine barely tried to prove it wasn't so when she heard those words again. But this time she wouldn't stay quiet and replied that she wasn't a dog. As Jonah said, Sir Richter had too long a tongue. She had to constantly remind him that she was still his superior. But that's not all. Eric was surprised that the lady knew the laws and kicked Florence out of the palace. Before, Jonah saw his audacity as hatred, but now she understood that this was how he showed his concern. On that fateful day, Eric said that dying there would be a meaningless death. How terrible! The protagonist believed she had to obey the Emperor's order regardless of her life. If she hadn't obeyed, many of her subordinates would have survived that day. Jonah decided to thank Eric for his concern and told him she would leave the order. She wouldn't have to put up with her boss's antics anymore. But the gentleman didn't understand anything. Completely confused, Eric asked where the lady got the idea that he cared. Now was the time for Jonah to change that life that led her to destruction. Now the girl was clear about it. She would never set foot there again. Days later, in one of the most exclusive palaces, a gala was being held. It was common knowledge that Lady Jonah herself would honor the gathering with her presence. The dazzling lady made her triumphant entrance, enhancing her firm character and power. Miss Modrov wore an exquisite dress with crimson roses, matching the pendant adorning her neck. Much had happened since her last encounter with the Viscountess, who noticed the guests' arrival. The Viscountess recalled their last meeting at the Crown Prince's birthday banquet. The previous year. As a subject of the prince, the young woman kept away from the nobility, wrapped in an aura of mystery. But now, engaged to the heir of a noble house, she sparked the curiosity of everyone present. If Jonah wished, she could become one of the most influential ladies with a simple snap of her fingers. Today, the young woman attended alone, as having received the invitation late, she didn't have time to find company. The young and blossoming young lady apologized for not having given notice in advance. The Viscountess clearly noted that the girl behaved like a true aristocrat with impeccable manners. The lady laughed and said that before marriage, it was worth trying to dance with other men at least once. Clutching the invitation in her hands, a redhead sat in a corner of the hall. The page of her invitation was empty, like a blank sheet. No one had invited her to dance. At that moment, the charming lady said that they had met before. The protagonist kindly extended her hand and introduced herself as Yona Modrov. From the surprise, the girl was momentarily stunned. She did not expect such a sudden introduction. A little later, the girl introduced herself as Julia Becker, the eldest daughter of Baron Becker. She lived far from the capital, but but stayed with her relatives during her debut. Jonas knew that, in that case, Jonas must accompany her to the capital. Upon hearing her brother's name, the girl's eyes lit up. She didn't expect her young lady to know him. Of course, Miss Modrov had met Duke Leary several times, and therefore, she knew young Jonas. Jonas was the eldest son of the Beckers, vassals of the Han family. He and Duke Leary grew up together and became loyal companions. Due to his easygoing manner, it was hard to say he was a knight, and for the protagonist it was even harder to imagine him in the role of a subordinate. Now Julia understood why her young lady had approached her, and disappointment instantly froze on her face. Miss Modrov decided to introduce the little girl to some of her acquaintances, as Jonas had left his sister alone. At such events, it was customary for the conversation to be initiated by those of higher social standing. Julia's brother became the Duke's assistant to help the family, but he paid no attention to her difficulties. Julia was called the ivy flower, like the ladies ignored at dances, clinging to the walls. Her brother wouldn't understand it, so for the little Miss Becker, it would be a great honor. Soon Jonah would marry the Duke, and they would become a great family. The young woman wanted to make a good impression, so there was no reason to worry. For the heroine, it was just a way to fix her life, but for Julia, it was a ray of hope. After walking a bit through the hall, Jonah noticed a familiar face, and the young man ran towards her. He said that sometimes he could leave work early, if the young lady wished to attend parties more often. It was the perfect moment to introduce Sir Florian, from the knightly order, to young Julia. Being so close to a boy for the first time, the little girl blushed, but she was happy to meet him. Among the gray mass of aristocrats, the two looked like small roses blooming, intertwining with each other. Only after a while, Julia realized the time. Her brother had to pick her up soon. So as not to let the girl go at those hours, Jonas went out with her and greeted the brother. From afar, Jonas didn't see Miss Modrov, but upon getting closer he froze. As his wedding approached, Jonas wanted to socialize more and get to know Julia. Upon hearing that, Jonas's expression changed instantly, and he protected his sister with his body. He clearly suspected something and demanded that the lady explain her intentions. The young man did not understand how she could know that Julia was his sister. He thought the lady was looking for his sister on purpose, as it was known that Jonah did not go to events. The heroine understood that it seemed she went to the ball on purpose and met her sister. No one expected Julia to explode and start hitting her brother for judging someone she didn't know. The little girl became furious because her brother was rude to the one who helped her. Miss Becker recounted that she was leaning against the wall the whole time and didn't even exchange a word with anyone. The young man was not prepared to hear that. In fact, he should have listened to it sooner. Julia had no friends. No one helped her. And with tears in her eyes, she said she didn't have the strength to ask her brother for help. The girl considered herself a burden and a hindrance to her brother. But Lady Jonah didn't think that way about her. So Jonah embraced her sister, stroking her head. She apologized for her thoughtless behavior. She simply didn't notice her feelings and now promised to be by her side. Wherever Julia went, he would follow her. The tears on the girl's cheeks dried from the warmth that warmed her heart and soul. The little girl finally smiled, but she didn't forget Lady John, so she stomped hard on her brother and demanded an apology. The most important thing was that Miss Becker had a wonderful time. The protagonist didn't need apologies. She knew that Jonah's lacked tact. Moreover, the young man was right. She had personal reasons for doing so. She revealed that she wanted to make a good impression on him. She wanted to please him. The sweet lady took the marriage more seriously than Jonas thought. Jonas knew that he was suspicious, but he longed for a good relationship with the Duke as spouses. Therefore, it was vital to change Jonas's opinion. He served his future husband. Jonas could serve her too. Perhaps they shared the same goal. Bowing his head, the gentleman apologized for misunderstanding her. But Miss Modrov would act as if neither that apology nor the mistake had ever existed. In return, she asked him to tell the Duke to attend the ball and gave Jonas the list of nobles. Jonas couldn't send a messenger. His father would monitor him instantly. Everyone believed that Duke Lear accepted the marriage proposal under pressure from the imperial family. To dispel these rumors, they had to feign a close relationship, even if it was pure theater. Besides, the protagonist had to get used to high society. This way, she would achieve her goal. Late that night, Jonas returned to the palace. An urgent assignment prevented him from staying with his relatives. Extending a small bundle, the young man handed the Duke a message from Lady Jonah. In it, a list of all the events she planned to attend, and she asked the Duke to drop by a couple. But Lear couldn't shake the feeling that this enigmatic young woman was drawing him into some scheme. He had the impression that the lady was slowly luring him into a honey trap. What nonsense was crossing his mind? They said that it wasn't for nothing they called him the Crown Prince's bloodhound. He had to tread carefully with that woman. But Jonas didn't believe the prince deserved such loyalty, and Lady Jonas was smart enough to see it. Those words made the Duke realize that something had happened between his friend and the lady. Simply put, Jonas said he had been a fool and blamed the lady for everything without any reason. Disbelievingly, the Duke frowned and demanded that he speak clearly. Nicely. His friend just waved his hand and avoided getting involved in his reasoning with his own ideas. Before leaving, Jonas asked the hero to visit Julia, who was unaware of the political games. During all that time, the Duke thought that the letter had a hidden message that Jonas missed. But upon opening the scroll of paper, he saw that it was truly a list of all the noble families. The adorable Jonah always managed to surprise Duke Han with her actions. Soon, Miss Jonah arrived at the family nest. First, she wanted to talk to her father. It was a wonderful and peaceful day. Even at home, calm reigned. Just when the Count least expected it, Jonah suddenly appeared by his side. Panicked, Hayden tried to flee, but his daughter firmly closed the doors to prevent his escape. Trying to justify himself, the gentleman claimed he had simply forgotten something. In the end, both had to talk. Jonah had something important to say. It turns out that Nils sent an assassin after the young woman, and she was already on her way. Upon hearing this, the Count feigned surprise and even demanded a single piece of evidence. The assassin was captured, and Jonah tortured her. And, of course, revealed the contractor's name. Then, Hayden was forced to apologize for not raising worthy children. But the truth is that all the descendants had pushed him to the limit. And now Hayden risked losing his good relationship with the imperial family. Jonah was not surprised that her father didn't care. But the talk was taking an interesting turn. The Count, assuring that he would fix everything, betrayed himself with his nervousness. Nothing new for the heroine, actually. She only wanted one thing. Lady Jonah demanded that Nils be officially named heir to the Modrov family. As she explained, Nils could not be the head of the family, and by not being named heir, he unleashed his fury against his sister. The Count didn't understand anything. His daughter had never wanted to be the heir. It all came down to blood purity. With Nils in charge, rivalries between the children would cease. Now the Count had to ensure that his son didn't commit such nonsense again. And since Nils wouldn't trust his sister, Jonah asked her father to announce his decision himself. Soon the entire Modrov family gathered for dinner, with real delicacies on the table. With renewed strength, the Count announced he had crucial news. That day, the clan leader declared Nils heir to the Modrov family. Finally, the young man was worthy. From excitement, he even dropped his fork. It was such an important moment that Ivan couldn't help but hug her brother. Now Nils looked at his half-sister with more disdain, savoring his triumph. The reason the Count had delayed naming an heir for so long was Nils. According to his father, the boy never thought about the consequences of his actions. From now on, he had to be prudent and not disappoint his father with more messes. Jonah didn't lag behind either, congratulating Nils on the title he so longed for. Those words affected him deeply. A spark of discord jumped between them. Now that his father recognized him as heir, he only had to crush that witch. Dinner ended soon. The father left. The children were the last to get up. Suddenly, Nils jumped up and approached his sister, completely bewildering her. He was sure his father wouldn't leave the family to Johnny. He called her insignificant. The boy felt superiority over that bastard who so longed for power. No matter how much she acted like a loyal bitch. She was a bitch. Words improper for account. The protagonist never imagined that her father would sire an heir who would bark at a bitch. Miss Modrov believed the young man lacked the intelligence for an heir's education. Nils should not rejoice too soon. The conflict escalated after his appointment. Unable to bear more insults, he angrily grabbed her by the neck and wanted to hit her. Panicked about losing control, Yvonne tried to restrain her brother and warn him not to do it. So as not to disappoint his father, he let go of the damned girl, saying she had simply been lucky. Leaving a bad taste in their mouths, Nils and Yvonne left. They were just a couple of jackals. Now that Nils's attention was not focused on Jonah, it was time to start preparation. The next day, the young lady had to attend a ball at Count Richter's mansion. While Nils was busy preparing to assume the title, Jonah attended balls and dinners in the capital. The beautiful lady did not go unnoticed by the aristocrats, who invited her months in advance. People were glad she accepted their invitations and thanked her for the rescue on Blanche Street. They even invited the young lady to this autumn's equestrian competitions. Some assumed Jonah wasn't interested in opera, but she guessed the ending with such accuracy. It was a great premiere, but fortunately, the heroine didn't give anything away this time. In her past life, at this hour the Duke was looking for the missing bride, Vivian. And her parents were already dead. The Duke's willingness to get engaged was pure theater. In reality, he was hoping to find the former princess. Even though Jonah sent a note with Jonah's, she knew the Duke wouldn't show up. The lady with glasses was shocked that, out of boredom, the young lady embroidered a handkerchief for the Duke. The raccoon image conveyed the harsh difficulties of wild life. But that face resembled a lion. It would be lovely if the young woman retouched the embroidery a bit for their next meeting. But the problem is that she had no idea when they might see each other again. Suddenly, silence flooded the room. Marcia was petrified seeing the Lord in front of her. The wavy brown hair shone under the intense light of the hall, as if hiding tiny crystals. The handsome Duke finally arrived at the gathering. His dazzling smile struck everyone. His beauty stunned Jonah, making her feel like a first-time infatuated teenager. She didn't expect to see him there, but he knew she was going to Count Richter's ball. It would be problematic if they saw each other where there were other eyes and ears observing. But according to Jonah, that didn't mean the Duke could just show up like that, unannounced. But even more surprisingly, Lord Leroy kindly brought gifts with him. His assistants held several large boxes, wrapped in gift paper and adorned with ribbons. It was unthinkable. The rubies were the color of Lady Jonah's eyes, and the silk shone incredibly. To find out Lady's clothing size, the Duke even visited the clothing store where she shopped. According to Jonah, he shouldn't have bothered with the gifts, as she already had enough outfits. By the number of dresses, you would say she wasn't nobility. But the truth is that the young woman didn't like to adorn herself, despite having all the purchasing power. And it was better that way. The Duke thought they shouldn't waste his savings on nonsense. She clarified to him that this didn't mean he should cover such expenses. Unlike her, these gifts were a trifle to him. Upon hearing this, the young woman gladly accepted receiving them with gratitude. Suddenly, Lord Han requested permission to ask an uncomfortable question, which alarmed Jonah. The thought that she wasn't treated well in that house made her turn pale, with 1,000 thoughts crossing her mind. In reality, the gentleman wanted to know if the Modrovs often beat or yelled at her. Noticing that the talk was about the mark on her cheek, the young woman denied that this was the case. Rumors reached the Duke that the recently appointed Modrov heir envied Jonah and beat her. It was hard to deny those rumors. That's why the girl couldn't utter a single word. Apparently, although Lady Modrov never lied to her lord, she wasn't entirely honest with the Duke. A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. The heroine only thought about how to explain everything better. All Leroy wanted to know was who had left bruises on his fiancée's face. upon learning that the culprit was Lady Florence, the crown prince's ex-fiancée. The Duke did not expect it. Suddenly, she asked Marcia for a medicinal ointment, and the maid immediately ran to get it. However, Marcia was not the best assistant in this. She almost forgot she still had laundry to do. But even so, she brought the Duke the cream to heal bruises, and the gentleman took a little from inside. Lear gently touched the young woman's face and began to rub the cream delicately. A very strange sensation overcame her. Jonas felt uncomfortable. In her past life, they even kissed. Now, he only brushed her face, but even that contact made the hair on her skin stand completely on end. The Duke would think he shouldn't have bothered if Jonas had taken care of this herself. The protagonist only thought about why he accepted her proposal, when before he begged for that marriage. In this life, it didn't happen that way. Instead, the Count invited Duke Leroy to dine with them. Thanking the chef, the Duke admitted that he found the food exquisite. Meanwhile, Nils worried about his sister, who had drunk a lot and was dizzy. Suddenly, Yvonne decided to step out for a moment and asked Yona to accompany her. The Count's eldest daughter could barely stand. Everything was spinning for her, so Yona took her hand. But Yvonne immediately pulled it away, saying that a dirty blood didn't deserve such an opportunity. She herself wanted to be the Duke's wife and ordered her sister to cancel the engagement immediately. However, that was the order of His Majesty, the Crown Prince. So they had no right to object. Yvonne considered the girl a mere liar, greedy for the Duke's money. And she decided to tell everything herself. Miss Modrov held her breath upon hearing that the Duke might discover the truth about her illegitimate origin. No one even knew who Yona's mother was, but rumors spread that the woman abandoned her and took the father's money. Clenching her fist, the heroine said that she didn't choose her mother, nor how she was born. But in response, only Yvonne's shouts were heard. The girl believed herself to be the most suitable for the title of the Duke's fiancée. At one point, she decided to tell the guest everything, but Jonah could not allow that to happen. But when the angry girl opened the door, she came face to face with the Duke himself. A surprise for everyone. The only thing Leroy desired at that moment was to hear once more that Jonah was an illegitimate daughter. A determined gentleman demanded that they tell him the whole truth at once. Yvonne insisted that she always wanted to tell. But her sister was so brazen that she couldn't. According to the Duke, the best thing for the young lady was to return to the dining room right now. Apparently, he and Yona had to talk alone, so Ivan happily let them be alone. It was not a time to worry. In the protagonist's eyes, there was only disappointment. For the first time, Miss Modrov felt empty facing her fiancé. The atmosphere was tense. But surprisingly, the Duke only politely asked her to explain the whole situation. With hands tightly clasped, Jonah had no excuses as that was the truth. The young woman dared to deceive the Duke and insist on the wedding. Apparently, something unforgivable. If Leroy cancels the engagement, he will not fulfill Richard's order, and he will see his uselessness. And he will abandon her. Fearing not fulfilling the Crown Prince's order, the poor girl burst into tears and confessed that the Duke heard the truth. Leroy thought the lady wanted to deceive him upon hearing that she was the illegitimate daughter of Count Modrov. Warm tears fell like hail onto the floor. Yona was desperate and even began to beg the Duke. Her red eyes were full of despair. Her only wish was that Leroy would not cancel the engagement. The Modrov family had no intention of sharing that secret, so the young woman promised that no one would know. For one more chance, she had no choice but to swear that even Ivan would keep her mouth shut. Jonah promised not to cause any trouble for his lordship, but the gentleman remained standing, without saying a word. This time, his beautiful eyes were full of anger. He looked at the young woman with contempt and plotted something in his mind. Then, Miss Modrov, full of disappointment, believed for a second that he would never speak to her again. But at that moment, Lear grabbed the lady and hugged her tightly. Jonah immediately felt a knot in her throat. Her chest tightened. It was unthinkable. The Duke could no longer stand tears. He wanted to marry Jonah Modrov. The young woman felt her heart beating, but felt terrible. She had to calm down and not get distressed. Pressing against the Duke, the lady buried her nose in him and felt protected. The truth was that the Duke had agreed to marry her for one single reason. He simply felt sorry for her. Lear could not ignore the pleas of such an insignificant being. The Duke kept looking into her eyes as if everything in his head were different. And Jonah clung to that kindness, ending up depriving him of his happiness. If the heroine told that now and started crying, he would feel sorry and marry her. However, she said that the Duke might think she tolerated that treatment, but it wasn't so. Upon hearing that, the Duke was perplexed and did not understand what she meant. Jonah received a couple of bruises, but Nils lost his front teeth and now spoke like a 3-year-old. And Lady Florence paid dearly. She was expelled from the palace for hitting Jonah while she was performing her duties. Surprisingly, the Duke simply laughed. The young lady was so proud of her justified revenge that it even amused her. The gentleman wanted her to react as she always had before, when she was treated that same way. If the protagonist reacted to every trifle, she would simply exhaust herself. This made Leroy understand that this kind of treatment was not new to her. But the girl decided not to talk about it. Even if it was so, it wasn't worth making a mountain out of a molehill. The fact that these things happened too often did not mean that the protagonist didn't hurt all the time. He squeezed the young lady's hand tightly and said that it couldn't possibly not cause pain. Jonah was slightly annoyed that the Duke thought she would pass out from a couple of slaps. The Duke apologized upon realizing that the lady was not an ordinary girl. The only one who didn't treat Yona as a bastard or as the Emperor's hound was the Duke. Even going back to the past, the heroine begged him to marry her again. But if Miss Madrov truly wanted to help, she would give him a chance to find true love. After everything that happened, Yona concluded that she didn't think she was in love with the Duke. But her last kiss in the past life was so vivid and sensual that it was etched in her memory. However, the lady didn't understand how all those confusing feelings could be called love. Shortly, Jana Madrov, accompanied by Duke Leroy, appeared at the ball at Count Richter's mansion. The rumors that they would attend the ball together turned out to be true. To society, they were a wonderful couple, and unlike some rumors, they were quite close. Today, in a couple of minutes, the heroine received more attention than in her entire life, thanks to the Duke's gifts. Leroy had thought last time that the lady was beautiful, but he didn't imagine how much more dazzling she could be. That day, they finally met Count Richter and his family. Sir Eric was also present, but today he looked as stunned as if he realized his boss was a beauty. The Countess kindly greeted the guests, noticing that the Duke resembled her late father. As a young man, Count Richter saw the hero's father several times when he was popular with the ladies. And he thought the ladies of high society must have had a similar opinion of the Duke. Count Richter gladly would continue the conversation, but they had to greet the other guests. When finally there were no curious ears, Eric stayed to ask what they were plotting. Then, Jonah introduced her colleague from the order service to her companion. The young man was delighted to meet her and introduced himself as Eric. The men sealed the encounter with a handshake, and Jonah praised Eric for his hard work in the division. The boy said the Duke looked good, which was surprising, considering he came with Lady Jonah. Unlike him, Leary, on the contrary, thought Jonah was an incredibly beautiful girl. Eric shouldn't have dug his own grave and insulted his boss in front of everyone. It became evident that the young man was behaving strangely, as if he were very tense. At the most unexpected moment, the Countess suddenly called him, so he had to leave. It was a suspicious encounter, and Jonah hoped no fool would fall for his pretty face. Then, the Duke took a couple of drinks and asked if my lady was like that. Leary meant that he believed she wouldn't fall for a pretty face, even though he himself was quite a heartthrob. Lady Jonah found it strange. She thought the gentleman hadn't even heard how Eric addressed her. According to the Duke, that boy with an inflexible temper didn't moderate his strength even in a handshake. But he was still the lady's subordinate and had terrible eyesight. He couldn't even distinguish people. Hearing all this chatter from Miss Madrov, the Duke couldn't believe she defended a man while talking to him. But it wasn't like that. Jonah considered Eric just a subordinate with whom she had a hard time. The girl apologized if her words offended the Duke. And while she was at it, she apologized for her subordinate. Lyra didn't need these humiliations. Besides, he wasn't as upset as he appeared. However, he was still not sure he had forgiven the lady. He even apologized for him. In the middle of the conversation, a gentleman suddenly came running. He claimed to have seen the Duke at the house of Baron Rimpur, the cousin of the friend of his maternal grandfather's wife. He was a close friend of the hero's grandfather. The gang of aristocrats was also approaching, sure that Niels would fall sooner or later. Or later. They wanted to intervene and lighten the mood, to show they were not like Nils. Just at that moment, Jonah noticed them approaching, just as she had predicted. These guys saw Jonah as someone close to the crown prince, and they didn't want to lose his favor after the engagement. The protagonists were a couple of meters away and didn't know what to do. The redhead Josephine was the son of Viscount Alouch, and Bet Potter said his father owned the Petter Company. Jonah instantly knew they were complete incompetents, even though they considered themselves important. In reality, they were sons of the rich or second sons without influence, but with incredible luck. The last time they met was at the Count's mansion, and Josephine commented that Lady Jonah had become even more beautiful. Wow, the saying that first impressions count applied perfectly to the heroine. With that beautiful gift from the Duke, Jonah looked absolutely dazzling today. The young woman assumed that the boys were disappointed because Niels hadn't attended the ball due to his studies. Perhaps the young lady wasn't as good a player as her brother, but she agreed to participate in the meeting. Josephine got excited about the idea and said he was very happy to meet, even if late. He dared to ask if his lordship would like to join them too. In reality, Lear's hand would be more than happy if he could go with them, along with Lady Jonah. But the young woman felt the greatest happiness upon hearing such warm words for the heart. The boys didn't even know that the Duke cared so much about the young lady. And they were already waiting for them at the meeting. After their meeting, Jonah couldn't help but say that thanks to the Duke, everything went wonderfully. The young lady wanted to express her great gratitude, but suddenly noticed someone behind her. Eric approached close enough not to be seen by the Duke and indicated something to her. The young man pointed to the exit, as if inviting the lady to accompany him to the balcony. Eric went unnoticed, but the Duke noticed a slight unease in his companion. To dispel suspicions, the young lady assured that everything was in perfect order. She suddenly remembered that it was time for Lyra to leave. He had to dance with Count Richter's daughter. The Duke was so busy driving other men away from his fiancée that he almost forgot his promise. Jonah looked at him with the same purity and innocence, but decided to hide the most important thing. With great relief, the lady dismissed her companion, eager for the meeting. Full of resolution, she promised to await his return impatiently. Before leaving, the gentleman begged his fiancée to refuse any invitation to dance from that subordinate. If that rude lout loses control of his strength again, the lady will be in danger. Jonah never imagined he would speak of Eric like that, although I must admit it was flattering. In a way, she understood the Duke's mistrust and fears, so she couldn't refuse her future husband. When the protagonist was left alone, she decided to immediately try all the delicacies offered at the ball. At that moment, Sir Eric firmly grabbed the lady's hand and demanded explanations for why she hadn't gone. It was a great audacity on his part, as Miss Modrov was not going to run out to fulfill an order. Everything was too complicated, but Eric still wanted to get a minute of her time. Since the balcony wasn't the boss's favorite, the knight decided to talk right there. He shouted that he intended to talk during the ball, as he had an important conversation. However, the lady didn't want any prying ears, so she agreed to talk on the balcony. It turned out that Eric thought she was crazy for leaving her post to get married. Jonah didn't understand his anger, but first tried to calm him down. The mysterious atmosphere of the ball said it all. Eric tried to ask her not to get married. Miss Modrov didn't even answer, but everyone knew it was an order from the crown prince. The lady only diverted her gaze, lost in thought. She couldn't answer everything. She didn't want to lie to Eric, but she couldn't inform the crown prince of her plans either. Aware of the knight's loyalty to his lord, Eric didn't want Jonah to sink even lower. Rage consumed the boy. He didn't believe she would give up her bravery and honor for a simple order. He truly believed that the sword was his calling, although he often wasted his talent. Then, Jonah understood that Eric thought she was leaving her service by order of the crown prince. The reason the lady left her post to marry the duke was not by order of the crown prince. In reality, she acted of her own free will entirely. For starters, the heroine clarified that the crown prince did not force her to renounce her knightly order. So Jonah asked the boy to stop making up nonsense. Please. Secondly, there was a weighty reason for her to make that decision. The young woman wanted Eric to answer sincerely if it was hard to work in that field his whole life. After going around in the same circle, Jonah understood that she wanted to take a different path. A new one. They were paid well in the order, but enduring that pressure was only possible in youth. Those words made Eric reflect deeply. This time, he didn't even reply. Everyone knew how much he had suffered in that viper's nest. So Saskia understood her perfectly. And if Jonah now wanted to form a real family, the captain wouldn't judge her. However, Eric didn't see that marriage as real, nor as a reason to leave his service. But resignation was inevitable. One could not be a loyal servant and a worthy wife at the same time. Sir Eric even supposed that the crown prince secretly ordered her to resign. The captain of the knights wanted to be honest. She felt sorry for Yona, but she wouldn't interfere. Interfering in her relationship would only be justified by jealousy or by not wanting her to marry. Since jealousy was in both reasons, Saskia was sure that Eric was focused on the duke. Another option was that the young man simply didn't want the girl to marry anyone. Deep down, Eric knew that jealousy was complete nonsense. Still, he didn't understand what path that was. One she hadn't even thought about before. She just needed Jonah to explain it better. And then the lady sighed heavily. Fortunately, Miss Madrov agreed to tell everything. But it was a secret. Now, even if the emperor asked Eric, he must not reveal it. This time, the heroine wanted to protect the hero. She wanted to make sure the duke would be happy. Having the only chance to change everything, the sweet lady was doing all this for a happy life in marriage. Jonah didn't avoid death and was reborn in vain. She wanted to be greedy, at least a little bit. When thoughts of love came to mind, she added that romance was also one of the reasons. Now she hoped Eric would finally understand her, and she wasn't the best boss either. Hearing this, the young man took it as a cruel joke and started shouting, clenching his teeth. He said he was sincerely worried and didn't expect something like this. Anger and disappointment overwhelmed him, and Eric left, not caring about anything. Alone, Jonah did not return to the ball and breathed the fresh air deeply for a long time. That night, the full moon illuminated the sky, but Eric's reaction remained a mystery. Above all, Miss Madrov longed to know if this marriage would be a success. At that moment, footsteps were heard, and the gentleman noticed that, in his absence, she was indulging in sad thoughts. Duke Leroy returned just in time and knew that the lady was on the balcony. It happened that he saw Sir Eric running out of there at full speed with a terrible expression. Jonah reassured him by saying they were only discussing some matters. Nothing to worry about. Holding his breath, the Duke looked at the young woman strangely, unable to understand her. As a child, Leroy heard a phrase, "If you marry without love, that marriage will not be successful. A marriage without love will not be happy." The heroine's old master used to say that. During training, when Jonas felt desperate, he used to say she couldn't be a knight. And if remorse plagued her, he convinced the girl to blame her parents. So the heroine asked if the Duke believed in a happy marriage without love. Leroy didn't believe in that, but he wanted to know if that person still thought the same. Asking him directly was not easy, and the age was no longer the same. With a sigh, Jonah shared that she wasn't entirely sure about that phrase either. But she knew something. The girl realized that the Duke had overheard her conversation with Eric. The Duke laughed that the lady had just realized. She wasn't very perceptive. Leroy was near the window when Eric asked the lady to answer honestly. The young man asked a question, whose answer the Duke also longed to know. As soon as he heard that Jonah was doing everything for a happy marriage, the gentleman was stunned. Every word from his chosen one made the knight reflect deeply. Faced with the unexpected answer, the Duke choked on his champagne, and Eric fled from the balcony. Upon meeting Leroy, Eric confidently stated that both of them were being forced into marriage. Without waiting for an answer, the enraged young man fled in panic. Unknowingly, Leroy Hen caused a misunderstanding, but saw no reason to apologize. Or perhaps there was no such misunderstanding, as Jonah was unaware of how much he had managed to hear. According to the girl, she just wanted the boy to stop interrogating her, so she blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Then, the Duke asked if it would be acceptable for him to have an affair, since marriage was not Jonah's goal. Here the issue was marital fidelity, something very different for the lady. She couldn't believe the Duke was capable of that, but he just laughed. Seeing potential in the girl, Leroy wanted to integrate her into his family. But his relatives, instead of valuing her, shamelessly used her as a tool. The crown prince pretended she was important while dragging her into dirty business. Since the rumors of marriage began, the lady only showed the Duke sincere kindness. And now he understood why she was trying so hard for the marriage to be happy. The gentleman understood that she couldn't marry for love, and that's why she tried to love the one she was forced to marry. According to him, fidelity between spouses was an extremely serious matter. And then, Leroy suddenly extended his pinky finger towards the girl and proposed they seal a promise. If they marry, they will remain faithful to each other, and only each other. Jonah stood up abruptly, stunned. She didn't want to force the Duke like that. The promise was mutual, so not only would he be obligated. Even if the love of her life appeared, the promise could not be broken. Leroy proposed working together, and without romances, so that the marriage would not bring misfortune. Jonah stared fixedly at his finger, as if sealing a blood pact with the devil. A second later, the girl extended her pinky finger, and their fingers joined in an oath. They promised to exclude any situation that would even make them think about divorce. That night it rained torrentially, creating a mysterious mist over the kingdom. In the dark and empty corridors, only the loud pounding of leather boots could be heard. Crown Prince Richard arrived at the palace for the meeting, hiding many secrets. The maid immediately led him into the study, and the gentleman presented himself before His Majesty. In a huge armchair, a young woman with a covered face. Richard hadn't seen his mother in a long time. Richard arrived very late, even though the lady had summoned him. He excused himself by saying he was very busy with matters and lost track of time. The lady under the black veil said that was a good excuse for someone in a difficult situation. Richard could never see her face, hidden behind that lace veil. It has been 15 years since a terrible fire broke out in the palace, and his mother suffered severe burns. Since that day, the mother has not appeared in public and can no longer look in the mirror. To hide the horrible scars left by the fire, she put on a veil and locked herself in the deepest part of the palace. With the best rhetoric, the crown prince let slip that he was very affected. As soon as he was free from work, he ran to her. How cunning! His mother knew that the young woman would soon get married. She thought it was for the best, because if she moved far away, returning to the capital would be difficult. The lady insisted on keeping the girl close. She was young and rumors would fly. But despite everything, the Duke swore there was nothing between them. Richard could only watch as his mother destroyed anyone near him. Now he understood why his mother had decided to find him a husband. Although she thought he was too good for her, he wasn't up to her level. She wasn't being critical, just giving her opinion, nothing more. My mother's question was whether the Duke would accept. But Richard knew he had no choice. This marriage was already a display of confidence from the imperial family towards their lineage. He would not miss that opportunity. Vivian Schmidt was the last representative of the Schmidt lineage, Duke Leroy's ex-fiancée. Due to false accusations, she lost her family and social standing, but her whereabouts were known. Thinking she would be useful someday, Richard kept her under control, but his intuition failed him. If the Duke broke the engagement, the crown prince would use his pawn. In that case, my mother believed he was capable, which is why the gentleman took his leave. The cold farewell annoyed my mother. She expected the Duke to dedicate a moment to her and have a cup of tea with her. But Richard only coldly replied that he was already full. However, he didn't even touch the dessert she had specially prepared for him. Richard was astonished to hear that his mother remembered his favorite dessert. The lady couldn't forget it, but suddenly remembered that child. Cold beads of sweat slid down from the veil, and fury shook the mother. As rage flooded her mind, the lady screamed and clutched her handkerchief, as if trying to grab her face. Horrible thoughts invaded her head, and the mother ordered Richard to leave immediately. The crown prince tried to calm her hysteria, but the woman screamed with all her might and threw him out. Approaching his mother, Richard asked why she was so scared, as that girl was no longer alive. Besides, he reminded her that the mother had personally made sure of that. Something terrible was happening behind the study doors. Savage screams reached the outside, terrifying the servants. Terrified, the maids tried to call His Majesty to make sure he was all right. The castle walls shook incessantly. The hot tea spilled. Fragments fell to the floor. In a fit of panic, my mother smashed the crockery and demanded the Duke leave there immediately. She even furiously stomped on her favorite fig cookies, just to make him disappear from her sight. The fig liquid splattered the crown prince's face, and the fury in his eyes increased. This palace was a madhouse, so Richard decided to leave. He carried the blood of this lunatic in his veins. He feared becoming the same, but now he cared about knowing if Jonah had returned to work. The maid said she was still recovering from the trauma, and Richard ordered her to be called immediately. But the maid explained she had the day off, so she proposed sending a messenger to the Duke's estate. The crown prince refused, but he was worried the girl had stood him up. He had no choice but to wait, because for his plan his mother, his father, and Nils Madrov had to die. Something strange was happening at Penelope's boutique after a few days. An elegant dress stood out with a draped skirt, made of the finest Argentinian silk. With every step, the dress moved, which would give the lady a graceful look. Jonah hadn't bought dresses for so long that she forgot them, but she ordered this dress. The lady was delighted with the lady's excellent choice and wanted to present the next model. Jonah only wanted one dress, but her servants insisted there should be at least 20. Penelope's boutique was an incredibly popular place. Every noble person dreamed of a dress from there, as they were all made with the best materials. The workshop received an order from the Duke to make more dresses for Lady Jonah. But they had to turn down the other ladies. Suddenly, Jonah apologized and said she had to step away. She couldn't believe her wardrobe was actually that pitiful. But most importantly, letters addressed to Miss Madrov were arriving, and not just one. Among the pile of white envelopes, there was a letter whose sender was Josephine. Marcia remembered that Josephine Alusha was a friend of Mr. Nils, and didn't understand why he was sending an invitation. Jonah eagerly awaited that letter. In fact, they sent it at her request. She needed something from the young man. Then Marcia suggested buying something. After all, the milady was heading to a gambling house. Upon returning home, Miss Madrov was going to reply to the letter. And in the meantime, she asked the maid to keep it safe. Jonah wasn't ready to return yet, but Marcia insisted they couldn't delay much longer. Since there was no other option, the protagonist had to finish with the dresses as quickly as possible. As soon as the milady and her maid entered the workshop, they heard shouts. Someone was refusing to accept an order. Upon entering, Yona saw a girl who shamelessly presented herself as her sister. The heroine arrived just in time. The girl was demanding that she order the seamstress to take the order. But this was not a case where Miss Madrov would rush to do what she was told. This infuriated Yvonne, so much so that she was going to tell the Duke Yona's real secret. However, there was no magic spell to undo her marriage to Leroy. Yvonne was sure that, upon hearing it, the Duke would break the engagement and choose a younger bride. Such stupid arrogance from her sister greatly amused the protagonist. Miss Madrov wanted to make sure her little sister understood why they wanted to marry her off to him. The reason was that having as a wife someone considered the crown prince's concubine was a great shame. And Yvonne, a true noble lady, bathed in luxury from the cradle, was not suited for those purposes. Yvonne couldn't contain her fury after hearing that. She believed they were shamelessly lying to her. The demoness lunged to hit her sister, but Yona stopped her hand instantly. If Yvonne wanted to tell the Duke everything, Miss Madrov wouldn't have stopped her. But for that reason, the brave Lady Yona was going to finish off the fool and propose to prove it. Those words scared the Count's eldest daughter, and she begged her to let go. The protagonist had no other choice. She listened to her sister and let go of her hand. She put Ivan in her place. Then she called Marcia and headed for the exit. Her sister will not speak anymore. 4 days later, the royal carriage stopped at the main entrance of the Alusha mansion. The door opened, and a delicate white foot in pink shoes peeked out of the carriage. The Duke had just arrived and managed to give a solemn welcome to his love. That day, a purple dress with black lace adorned the young woman, grateful for the gift. After greeting the lady with a hand kiss, the Duke stated that there was nothing special about it. Finally, Lady Jona Madrov and Duke Leary had arrived for a visit. Inside the mansion, there was a casino where gentlemen tested their fate. At the entrance, Josephine kindly received the guests. How eagerly she awaited this day. They were just about to sit down to play cards. So the young man invited the guests to join the game. A seer named Frida was even willing to organize a dice game for the lady. There was nothing better than a good chat at the gaming table, but no one imagined that Lady Jona liked these games. Frida gave the first turn to the lady, explaining that her objective was to guess how many specific numbers had come out. The order of play began with Jona, followed by Josephine, Frida, and the Duke. My lady placed the cup on the table and announced that she had chosen a trio. Josephine's choice fell on 3 fours, and Frida bet on 7 trios. The Duke was the last to play. He declared there were 6 for everyone. Everyone considered it absurd. And Lady Jona thought the gentleman hadn't understood the rules correctly. In any case, it was time to lift the cups. There was a trio. The victory belonged to Lady Jona. Then, the Duke dropped a pile of coins, but the young woman said that Leroy shouldn't lose on purpose. The guys even commented that at this rate, Lady Jona would be covered in gold by the end of the game. That sounded excellent to the Duke, as he was frustrated that Milady wouldn't accept his gifts. Wishing to play fairly, Miss Madrov suggested switching positions. The game continued, and no matter how hard the others tried to win, Frida kept all the coins. This was already becoming suspicious. The young man kept accumulating winnings nonstop. Frida himself noticed his good luck today, but they played so much that Josephine suggested a break. Then Frida took out his cigarette case and extracted a cigar. Then he took out one more and offered it to the guests, inviting them to smoke. The Duke didn't smoke, but Jona gladly accepted, greatly surprising her companion. What they said was true, betting on dice. One could lose an entire fortune. Miss Madrov supposed she resembled her brother. She had the same unlucky hand as Nils. However, Frida disagreed. After all, everyone has their ups and downs. In fact, he used to lose quite a bit against Nils, and he managed to beat Jona, accumulating many losses. In that case, the lady wanted to know what happened to the plot that Nils secretly acquired. After hearing this, Josephine's expression changed, and she was left speechless. No matter how much he tried to remain calm, Frida started to sweat and couldn't say a word. It was obvious that, whether Nils lost or won, at least something would remain of the land. But now, the milady claimed that the land was in their hands, and she proposed they return it. Caught red-handed, they swore that Nils didn't do it, that it was a misunderstanding. Jona thought that a misunderstanding wasn't part of the Count's land, passing from Siam to someone else's hands. But Josephine insisted that Nils had given away a completely useless piece of land. According to him, the mines had been abandoned for a long time. There weren't even any people. Despite their justifications, nothing changed the fact that he disposed of family property without permission. Miss Madrov mentioned all this to propose a solution to the problem. As Josephine said, the silver mines in this region no longer produce silver. Formerly, the mines belonged to the imperial family, and silver extraction was a great support for financing the throne. But everything changed when low-quality ore appeared in the area. Afterward, a series of unfortunate accidents occurred, and mine management became too difficult. Knowing this, the imperial family ceded the silver mines to the Madhrav family. But they soon closed. Both the imperial family and the county stopped paying attention to the region, which caused the price of this land to plummet. Jonah knew that nobody would care about a useless plot, even if Nils lost it. The guys cheered up a bit upon hearing the lady say that there were no unsolvable problems. Josephine immediately changed her expression and thanked her for her concern. As the drinks ran out, Josephine decided to go get more, and Frida offered to help her. They slipped away, leaving Lady Jonah and Duke Lyra to enjoy their break. Even the Duke noticed their discomfort. He was going to follow them to find out what they were planning. The young woman's only request was for Lyra to pretend to act out of kindness. The current owner did not want to make an enemy of the Count, but he wouldn't give away the land either. If the Duke offered to buy the land to solve this, he would be a savior. Silver extraction was costly and unproductive, but the veins still existed. If the plan went well, the protagonist wanted to reactivate silver extraction. The Duke knew the mine was abandoned for a reason. There must be a solution. From the young woman's silence, he understood that it was an important secret. Recently, he found an article about a new extraction method and wanted to present it to an expert. After the tough talk, Jonah lit a cigar, ready to light it and calm down. Noticing this, the Duke immediately brought an ashtray closer and asked if she had been smoking for long. In situations like this was necessary to generate a feeling of camaraderie. The Duke understood, but he wanted to know when she learned to smoke. In short, Jonah learned certain rules of conduct at an early age. Hearing this, the hero immediately thought of the damned Richard, always smoking his pipe. At that moment, the gentleman, without thinking twice, took the cigar and prepared to smoke. Confused, Jonah tried to stop him, but the Duke didn't consider it a problem. As soon as he lit the cigar, smoke invaded his lungs and he felt a sharp burning in his throat. Miss Madhrav was a little surprised to learn that the Duke was trying a cigar for the first time. Smoking was a bad habit, but the hero believed he was smoking natural tobacco. Once, the heroine saw a rat die after eating a cigar. They were not good. Lyra always felt that Milady cared more about him than about herself. It was true, Jonah damaged her health, but she forbade the Duke from smoking. Extinguishing the cigar, the gentleman said he was joking and suggested she quit. The beautiful Milady didn't reply and accepted, if that was what her lord desired. Faced with the young woman's penetrating gaze, the Duke became flustered. She knew how to do it. He overwhelmed Jonah with so many gifts that rumors soon started to emerge. Richard thought that gaining the support of the future emperor benefited the Duke. By then, rumors must have reached the crown prince's ears. The Duke wondered how that man who dared to take Lady Madhrav's inviolability was doing now. In his place, Lyra would never have given the woman he loved in marriage to another man. As expected, the land purchase process was quick and uncomplicated. Frida and Josephine explained everything to the current owner, and he gladly sold that useless plot. Furthermore, both families wanted to avoid it becoming known that the land with the mine had been lost in the letters. Now, the protagonist had a doubt about Tybalt. She wanted to know when the Duke delivered the letter to him. According to the gentleman, the Duke visited them yesterday, and it turned out he knew her younger brother. Jonah noticed that the younger one had the same hair color, an inheritance the brothers received from their mother. Now she understood that Tybalt's younger brother also played cards, and with such a brother, he associated with bad people. After this, the meeting ended, and when saying goodbye, Jonah asked them to tell Tybalt's brother to choose his friends better. That same day, the heroine ran into someone she hadn't seen for centuries. Upon hearing the knock on the door, the crown prince gave permission for her to enter. She curtsied upon entering. In his absence, she had become very close to the Duke, but she only submissively obeyed her master's orders. Poor girl. Richard didn't know that the Duke would bend over backward for her, even buying her clothes. Anyway, they needed to talk. So the prince invited her to sit down and offered her a cigar. But she replied that she felt uncomfortable if she smelled of tobacco. How strange. It seemed very strange to him, as she didn't mind before. What had changed? Jonah apologized, but her sudden changes were very suspicious. Very. If Richard thought the best thing would be for the lady to stop seeing the Duke. According to Jonah, he had not yet given his official consent to the marriage. But Richard only insisted that she shouldn't worry. He could convince the Duke alone. During her absence, the protagonist extended her sick leave and promised to return to work in 2 days. Although she covered the blow wound with makeup, almost no one noticed it except Richard. The lady was ready to return to her duties immediately, if her lord wished it so. A deathly silence flooded the air, and the crown prince decided to find out why the girl was offended. Yona's gaze was completely distant. She had heard the same thing again. Once, her lord had already given in to romanticism and was willing to cancel the marriage with the Duke for a single word from her. He constantly tested the waters, as if asking what else she was willing to sacrifice for him. And when she was no longer useful, they would simply discard her. Thoughts clouded her mind. Yona didn't know what answer he expected this time. Of course, Richard knew that Jonah's loyalty was not based solely on affection. He wanted to give her what she desired most, although the young woman was too generous towards her aggressors. Taking the lady's hand, the crown prince said that Florence had crossed the line by offending his true family. Only Jonah was allowed to enter Richard's chambers without permission. He considered her the most valuable thing. Such words could hurt Lady and Florence, the crown prince's wife. So Miss Madrov immediately stepped away. Deciding that it annoyed the young woman, the crown prince didn't care at all. He leaned over the girl and tenderly stroked her face, promising to force Florence to apologize. His strong hands moved gently through her hair. The gentleman was willing to do anything. Richard could demand compensation from the Langeoff family or even break his engagement. But in that case, Jonah would have to extend her vacation. His lordship said he needed to find a balance between work and his personal life. Those words repelled the crown prince, who sank onto the sofa, offering a single condition. He wanted that, during the vacation, Jonah would be his companion at least at one event. Noticing the look of disgust, Richard remembered that a knight could not object to orders. The meeting was over. Miss Madrov should not use that excuse. Seeing that in her past life the Duke mistrusted that relationship, the heroine decided to tell him everything. She didn't believe the Duke was jealous, but something in Richard's words disturbed her. There was a strange certainty in the gentleman that the Duke would accept the marriage without hesitation. It became evident that the reason might be that the prince knew Vivian's location. The bold girl decided to find her before she fell into Richard's clutches. That could change the Duke's attitude towards her, but Jonah couldn't allow someone precious to him to suffer. Soon, the action moved to the Schiller family mansion during an embroidery club meeting. Accompanied by Marcia and Lady Claudia, Miss Madrov visited Lady Schiller. The protagonist brought with her the embroidery she had been working on last time. Hoping to finish it. It was a charming atmosphere, so Lady Schiller was willing to help. At that moment, the sweet Erna entered the room. She hadn't missed anything and arrived just in time. The young lady wanted to sit next to Lady Jonah. It had been so long since they had seen each other. She remembered that in their last meeting, Miss Madrov was so elegantly dressed. But now she was wearing a uniform. While Erna chatted about Penelope's boutique and the dresses, Jonah's attention was captured by a silent maid. Lady Claudia asked Erna to stop bothering Lady Jonah, or she wouldn't finish the embroidery. Just then, Miss Madrov pricked her finger and, seeing the blood, Erna screamed even louder. It was just a scratch, but they sent Maria to help anyway. Meanwhile, Jonah thanked the girl and asked how long she had been working for Erna. Marie had been serving the lady for almost 5 years. Before, she had moved a lot and couldn't answer exactly. Upon hearing the question about difficulties in her duties, Marie thought she was being offered another job. Jonah just thought another occupation would suit the girl better. Marie's face was one of confusion. She didn't understand what they were talking about. However, Miss Modrov thought that Vivian Schmidt was just eager to return home. The girl was holding a box of medicine, but after those words, her hands trembled. Panic flooded her. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and the box fell, scattering its contents. The scene was so shocking that it seemed Jonah had truly stunned her. Then, the lady asked Vivian to stand up, assuring her that she did not intend to harm her. At that moment, the furious girl grabbed a pair of scissors, ready to kill the lady if she dared to move. Everyone knew that Jonah was the crown prince's lapdog, so no one believed her words. It was then that the heroine revealed that, to top it all off, she had become his boyfriend's fiancée. However, she wasn't even thinking of getting rid of Vivian and extended a hand toward her. Clutching the scissors tightly, Lady Modrov confessed that the Duke had searched for his missing fiancé everywhere. Upon hearing about the hero, Vivian calmed down and couldn't believe what she was hearing. But suddenly, she declared that she didn't know that man and didn't want to see him at all. Jonah froze, not understanding anything. The Duke would undoubtedly have helped her. Vivian confessed that was the reason she avoided him. Or would she drag him into who knows what? The young woman didn't want to see him anymore and wished to remain a maid until the end of her days. She squeezed her hand tightly, as if fearing something and being worried about the consequences. Jonah perfectly understood that Lady Vivian didn't want to be a burden to the Duke. She thought Miss Schmidt wouldn't solve anything by avoiding her problems that way. The imperial family already knew where she was and could take the girl's life. To help Vivian get revenge, Jonah offered her scissors and proposed meeting tomorrow. Otherwise, Miss Modrov advised her to leave the capital and not notify anyone. However, Vivian had only one question. Why was that lady helping her? The reason was that Lady Schmidt was very valuable to Jonah's husband. But she didn't want to be misunderstood. The young woman would not tolerate affairs. Vivian picked up the fallen scissors, thus promising that it would not happen. Thank heavens. Now Jonah was calm. She had done everything possible. The long delay greatly worried Erna, so much so that she blamed Marie for it. Jonah explained that she simply asked Marie to help her with the training wounds. Thanks to this wonderful maid, the heroine will have no scars. In that case, Erna congratulated Marie on the good job done. At that moment, Jonah realized that she had been so careless that she almost overlooked Vivian. After all, having unlimited access to the Crown Prince's office had its advantages. Noticing a paper on the table, the girl found information about Vivian. The hardest part was behind them. Now the heroine was ahead. All that was left was to wait for Richard to fall into the nets she laid for him. When it thundered and rained buckets, it was the anniversary of the stepmother's death. A dense silence invaded the dining room during breakfast. As expected, the Count left the mansion, citing urgent matters. Milady didn't know if he left for work or to see another mistress. But now, finally, she could start executing her plan. That day, the portrait of the Countess was adorned with white lilies and roses, as a sign of eternal remembrance. Fleur appeared at the family event just then. Yvonne, as expected, attacked her with shouts. But the shameless young woman was not going to repeat it many times. She just wanted to talk to the Count. If everything went perfectly, Fleur hoped to receive a fortune. Today was a crucial day for the family. So Nils was throwing the girl out and was ready to use force. Even though they were throwing her out, she wasn't planning to leave until she spoke to the Count. Hearing that, Nils literally boiled with rage and prepared to forcibly throw the girl out. At that moment, Jonah entered the hall and seeing Fleur, feigned surprise. The lady said she was only waiting for the Count. Lady Jonah's arrival was just in time. To be honest, everyone was very cruel to Fleur. She wasn't noble, but she revealed an intimate relationship with the Count. When Yvonne heard that crazy woman presenting herself, in a way, as her mother, she became enraged. Furious, she slapped Fleur in the face and shouted at her not to dare say such nonsense in her house. At that moment, Yona covered her father's mistress with her body, ordering her to hide behind her. This action greatly upset her sister. Yvonne didn't understand why they were protecting that shrew so much. Trying to calm her little sister, the protagonist begged her to accept her father's position. And think coldly. The idea that all this was really happening was driving Yvonne to the brink of madness. She wouldn't tolerate insults on the anniversary of her mother's death, so she promised to finish Jonah too. Her outburst was suddenly stifled by her brother. Nils sharply snapped at her to stop shouting. He ordered the maids to lock the young woman in her room and not let her out until she calmed down. The brother couldn't stop reassuring his sister and promised to resolve everything. The Count's eldest daughter shouldn't have gone so far, so now it was her turn to rest. Next, Nils said that Fleur had put the Count in an awkward situation. But the girl didn't intend it. Today was the Countess's anniversary, a day when the Count could not receive guests. Interrupting the conversation, Jonah demanded the lady leave if she had any dignity. In that case, Mrs. Fleur agreed to leave the palace that very day. Before leaving, she curtsied and asked them to send greetings to the Count from her. Furthermore, Nils told Jonah to get out too. He didn't want to see her face. If the girl had known it would come to this, she would have let the idiots finish. The angry little brother told her not to think too highly of herself, as she had only done her job. As Miss Modrov said, she shouldn't forget that her father had an illegitimate son. It wasn't her fault. However, these words angered Nils even more, and he knew he wouldn't dare tell the Count. This reminded Jonah that her brother always ran away with his tail between his legs, escaping from her. That the dirty blood compared him to her made Nils instantly boil with rage. He did not see the creature who raised his hand against his father as a role model, even though he himself couldn't do it. In the eyes of the brave heroine, this guy was just a pathetic coward and a parody of a person. Just as the milady was about to repeat her stepmother's last words, Nils suddenly grabbed her by the neck. Before dying, the Countess confessed that living for the Count was more unbearable than death itself. Nils froze and couldn't believe what he was hearing. He felt like everything inside him was crumbling. Confused, the boy stared fixedly at his sister, processing that those were, truly, his mother's last words. The Countess was the perfect embodiment of an elegant high society lady. She greatly valued what others thought. That's why she always behaved with respect and dignity. And all that forced her to live as if she were locked in a cage. She didn't love Hayden, but when they were forced to marry, she was unconditionally loyal to him. And so it continued. Even when Hayden brought home an illegitimate son, conceived with who knows who. That night, screams were heard from the castle. Something terrible could have happened to her mother. It turned out that the lady only allowed Jonah to enter, but her own children strongly objected. Yvonne and Nils tried to reach their mother, but even Hayden ordered them to stop. Jonah Modrov was allowed to see her mother, but she didn't understand why her mother wanted to see her. The lady was the only one in this house who didn't torment the girl, although she acted as if Yona were invisible. Even though the heroine hoped in vain, she longed with all her heart to hear words that the lady didn't say to anyone else. The Countess blamed the illegitimate son for everything. That was what Yona wanted to hear. The lady was already waiting for her, but the girl thought she hadn't called her to hear those words. Upon entering the bedroom, the young woman saw her mother in terrible shape, but immediately called her. Countess Modrov took the girl's hand, and for the first time acted as if she cared. When the young lady leaned over her body, the lady touched her forehead with cold lips. Confused words came from her lips. She said Yona would be next. The Countess's illness was contagious, and Yona was supposed to die after her, but they would not meet again. Because the young woman would be thrown into the depths of hell, and thus the Countess would end their destinies. Now young Modrov understood everything. The lady was planning to infect the girl with her illness. Her symptoms were similar to an epidemic. But the doctor, observing the progression, diagnosed something else. If Jonah hadn't appeared in this family, the Countess would have lived her whole life as an example of nobility. The young woman's existence completely ruined her mother's life. The unhappy lady was there when Madame ascended to heaven, but her destiny was hell. The heroine was the first to hear the Countess's last words and the last to bid her farewell. Now that everything is over, Madame can finally rest in peace. Still, Nils couldn't understand why his mother told those things specifically to Yona. But the young woman knew that the reason was that the Countess always wanted to be a good wife. And mother. At that moment, Nils discovered for the first time that his mother hid her pain from her father. And wounds. Jonah was the only one who saw her suffering. But those words only enraged Nils. Then, the young woman released her hand and told him he had misunderstood everything. She simply showed him that Nils was hiding behind the man's back, who only caused pain to his mother. It seemed the boy only served to pick up the scraps from the Count's table, as he had always done. Not wanting to prolong the chat, the lady chose to leave there. Upon learning that Fleur had arrived at the estate, the Count immediately flew into a rage. Sir reported that, fortunately, Lady Jonah managed to control the situation. The Count then learned that his daughter had kindly asked Fleur to leave, and she did so instantly. The news took the gentleman by surprise, so he ordered Jonah to be summoned immediately. Hayden never believed he would feel gratitude towards Jonah at some point. If he had behaved differently towards her, maybe she would have even been obedient. When the Count brought Jonah home, he knew his wife wouldn't be happy, and that's why he deliberately humiliated her. So that Nils and Yvonne wouldn't feel inferior, he told them a legend about Jonah's mother. But everything was false. And worse yet, the young woman wasn't his illegitimate daughter. He will take that secret to the grave. At that moment, the doors opened, and Jonah entered the room. Full of joy, the father thanked the young woman for dealing with Fleur. Someone had to do it. After suggesting sending Lady Fleur away on a trip, the protagonist declared that now she was in danger. The Count thought it was a good idea, as his lover's problems would also harm him. Hayden was extremely happy to hear that Jonah was willing to take care of everything. If the father gave her a good reason to leave the capital, the lady was ready to take Fleur with her. The gentleman had already traveled quite a bit between the capital and the estate, so he decided to delegate everything to her. In that case, the Count approved of the young woman handling it this year. What's more, he didn't even suspect that the girl cared so much about him and proposed forgetting old grudges. The conversation wasn't going well, so Jonah exclaimed that she wasn't doing it for him. Fleur was the mistress and the girl, an illegitimate daughter. What an explosive combination. According to the protagonist, the lady was lucky not to have gotten pregnant, or her son would have suffered the same fate. It was impossible to bear those humiliating words, so the Count, furious, slammed his fist on the table. He shouted that it was obvious thanks to whom Jonah hadn't grown up in a dirty alley with her mother. In that case, the girl didn't understand why her father had deprived Yvonne and Nils of so many opportunities. The lady stunned him by telling him that he had never treated her like his own daughter. Hayden couldn't believe what he was hearing. The girl placed her trust in him and did everything possible to please him. Even if it hurt, the protagonist understood that she would never be a true Modrov. The poor thing lived her whole life as a nobody. And now she, the bastard, had the opportunity to become a duchess. Now, if her father needed something, Jonah wanted equivalent compensation. The stronger her father made her, the greater her benefits would be. Depending on his decisions, Hayden could become the Duke's son-in-law. Jonah thought they could have a good cooperation. It was obvious that the father treated the girl worse than the others. But he always wished for her success. The young woman had nothing more to say. So she decided to leave. The Count jumped up from his seat instantly and ran after her, trying to stop her. Suddenly he shouted that Yona was his daughter, swearing it was true. It sounded convincing, so the lady asked him to keep convincing the others. The protagonist left, leaving the Count alone with his thoughts. The next day, with the sunrise, Yona hid her identity under a large hat. Settling into the carriage, she asked to be taken to Mail Street without anyone noticing. After that incident, the Count, hurt by his daughter's words, began sending her gifts daily. Marcia rightly pointed out that the Count didn't know Jonah at all. Soon they arrived at the place where her second aunt lived, but the young woman would continue alone. The mistress of the house, Madame Julia Benzel, wished to spend the rest of her life in peace and far from society. In other words, there couldn't be a better time for the visit. When the maid saw the young woman at the door, she didn't immediately recognize Lady Jonah. Madame couldn't personally receive the guest. She felt unwell and was in bed. The house was neat and tidy, and she even thought Mrs. Benzel had done it on purpose. Upon entering the room, the protagonist immediately smiled and felt incredible lightness. The crown prince kindly received her. He arrived just in time. Sir Jerome was delighted to meet her. He was the son of the gold mine manager. On the table, the Duke recounted that Jerome learned his father's trade from the cradle. He was unparalleled. He still has much to learn compared to his father, but he is willing to give his all. Apparently, Jonah realized that she hadn't yet been told what she would have to deal with. The young man promised that, whatever the mine was, he would not disappoint her. But upon hearing about the silver mines in the Siam region, it was as if an electric shock went through him. Jerome understood that he was in a terrible situation, as that place was in ruins. And without silver, Jonah couldn't believe the Duke brought this poor man without telling him where he would work. Leray tried so hard to find an expert, but the lady's reaction was glacial. It was time to revive Jerome. Jonah had to convince him of the mine's success. Then the young woman showed him the coveted chest, greatly arousing his curiosity. Upon seeing the stone inside, Jerome instantly recognized the silver ore. Following her plan, the bold lady wanted to make sure he knew everything about silver extraction. To begin with, they had to grind the silver into powder with a machine. Then, calcine the powder at a high temperature until it turns to ash and extract the silver from there. According to the expert, the silver mixed with other minerals upon extraction, resulting in an impure material. Jerome believed the lady should reconsider if it was worthwhile to start silver extraction in those mines. Transporting materials over mountain paths is difficult, and the ore quality left much to be desired. Miss Madhav wanted to propose a method to extract high-quality silver from the mixed ore. It was necessary to crush the silver and lead ore, heat it, and mix it with ash. Then, the lead and impurities would be absorbed by the ash, separating the silver. It was total madness. The expert jumped out of his seat upon learning of the innovation. The method described by Jonah, called cupellation, would soon arrive from the east. The girl simply didn't want the land to remain idle, so she researched extraction methods. Now she sincerely hoped Jerome would agree to go with them to Siam. Using this method, the young man promised that silver extraction would be a success. Furthermore, lead was easy to obtain, and the cost of labor would not be that high. Surprisingly, Jerome was ready to leave right away, gather workers, and start the mine. But Jonah asked him not to rush, whereupon the young man rose, bewildered. The truth is that the silver mine in the Siam Mountains was previously called the Death Mine. Miss Madhav recounted that the workers' skin turned blue and they suffered severe headaches. The mysterious deaths of the miners from that time were connected. Everyone complained of malaise. Healthy men, previously healthy, would enter the mine and rapidly lose their vital energy. Without even lasting a week, the miners died in very mysterious circumstances. From the symptoms, Jonah supposed they were dying from altitude sickness. How terrible! The Layman Empire was located on vast plains, and the Lamanites lived in places without elevation. But chasing the dream of finding treasures, or by order of their lord, people went there anyway. At that time, the kingdom was closed off, and it was very difficult to know about the existence of such an illness. And of course, when people died from unknown causes, they attributed it to a curse. According to Jonah, this would have been avoided with calmness and adequate hydration. Due to staff shortages, the milady wanted to recruit the neighbors. In that case, Jerome promised to prepare thoroughly and send a plan. With that, her meeting with the expert concluded, and Jerome left. Finally, the Duke expressed his astonishment upon learning that Jonah knew about the illness and silver purification. He even thought she saw the future. Buying the mine was shrewd. Miss Madrov recounted that the lands were given with periodic tribute. It was a small percentage, but over time it became difficult to pay. Still, Count Madrov wanted quick results from the imperial mine. He dismissed the current employees and hired more people. The number of accidents skyrocketed, and the losses were colossal. In the end, many lost their lives due to their boss's selfishness. Even if the mine closed, it would still be state property. Jonah revealed that the closed mine would not be a problem if it changed owners. The Duke instantly understood that it was no longer the case. Nils sold it without permission. The heroine knew very well that the Emperor would not let it slide if it was discovered that Nils gambled away the mine. Recently, Leroy realized they had never eaten together, so he took her to the bar. The handsome hero wanted to enjoy, even just once, seeing Jonah eat by his side. He liked that the tables were separate, even if the atmosphere was quite lively. It was the perfect moment for the lady to announce her imminent departure from the capital for 10 days. She revealed that Niels and Yvonne were furious about Fleur's visit. Therefore, the Count ordered her sent far away and entrusted Jonah with accompanying her. This made the Duke think that the Count lacked all morals. To everyone else, the lady was simply going to inspect the lands on behalf of Hayden. To take a break, the girl had to accept something that could be a problem. The issue was that Jonah had to appear as the Crown Prince's partner at an event. She decided to confess beforehand to avoid any future misunderstanding. Surprisingly, the Duke reacted calmly, as it was not by her will. He was glad Leary was calm, but it saddened him a little. He didn't even feel jealousy. To be honest, the Duke himself provoked the Crown Prince into these actions. The master only asked to be informed of the details, to also attend the event. The lady was so absorbed in her affairs that she didn't even notice when he called her. Leroy suddenly asked if something happened during the meeting with the Crown Prince. Jonah dared not tell him, but felt she had to confess once and for all. Although she didn't want to give the impression that she prioritized Richard over the Duke. To avoid misunderstandings, Miss Madrov admitted that Richard forbade her from meeting the Duke alone. Then, the Duke understood why young Yona wanted a secret date at the Bensel mansion. Leroy needed the truth. He wanted to know if his fiancée felt anything for her boss. Hearing that, Yona was extremely indignant. She truly couldn't forget the years by his side. But even if they abandoned her, that was no reason to forget all the good. Never. It was a surprise to the Duke when the lady spoke of assassinating His Highness. Until now, Leroy thought his fiancée's feelings for Richard were stronger than imagined. He said the girl made the right decision to take revenge, so she was incredibly lucky. The Duke believed Jonah hated the Crown Prince, but that feeling was more like indifference. The girl confessed that she had no reason to resent the prince, as he meant nothing to her. Then, Leroy heard for the first time that his fiancée had given up on her feelings for Richard long ago. At that moment, the gentleman felt a bit pathetic and even blushed that the lady always found the right words. The heroine will be absent for a whole 10 days. It will be a long separation from the Duke.